The Library of Babel Thought Experiment. Imagine a library so vast, its shelves stretch forever. Every book looks the same. Every page is filled with letters, some that make sense, most that don't. But hidden within this maze is a book that describes your life in perfect detail. Another that tells the exact moment you'll die. Another that lies about it. And one that says you were never born at all. This is the Library of Babel, a thought experiment imagined by Jorge Luis Borges, a place that holds every possible combination of letters and words. Somewhere in this infinity is the truth, but it's surrounded by noise so deafening you'll never find it. You could spend a lifetime reading, searching, hoping, and each time you think you've found something, some meaning, some message, it slips. Because for every true sentence, there are a billion false ones, each just as convincing. Here's the unsettling part. This isn't just fiction. Some physicists and philosophers believe reality works this way, that the universe is a combinatorial explosion of possible patterns, and we're just living inside one that happened to stabilize. It means truth might not be rare. It might be meaningless. It means knowing something could be the same as guessing right by accident. It means everything you believe could be buried inside an infinite shelf of contradictions, and you just happened to pick the version that felt real. But if that's true, what happens when you find a better book? One that promises something more, something darker. Would you read it? Would you believe it? Or would you wonder whether you were ever in a library at all? The no-world hypothesis. You wake up and something feels wrong. Not with your body, not with your memory, with everything. The walls feel hollow. The light looks staged. Conversations feel scripted, like everyone's saying lines they didn't write. What if they are? The no-world hypothesis suggests something deeper than solipsism. It's not that the world is fake. It's that there may never have been a world at all. No atoms. No particles, no space, no time, just the illusion of structure stitched together by perception. You're not inside a dream. You're the moment the dream starts pretending it had a beginning. Some philosophers argue that what we call reality is just coherence. If thoughts align, if sensations repeat, if cause leads to effect, we call it real. But what if that's just a pattern your mind invented? A loop convincing itself it came from something. You're not living in a simulation. That's too generous. Simulations require code, machines, infrastructure. The no-world hypothesis asks, what if there was never anything to simulate? If this idea is right, then even asking what's real is meaningless. It assumes a world you're trying to prove. But if the world never existed, then the question isn't wrong. It's nonsense. And the only thing left is the experience of asking. Perspectival realism. You walk into a museum and stand before a painting. Its massive, chaotic swirls of color, shadow, texture. From this angle, it looks like violence. From the side, serenity. From above, a pattern. 3 people next to you stare at the same canvas, and none of them see what you see. Perspectival realism says that's not just true of art, it's true of everything. There is no view from nowhere. Every truth we grasp is shaped by where we stand, who we are, what we expect. Not because we're biased, but because there is no single, unfiltered version of reality to access. Light hits your eyes at a certain angle. Language filters your thoughts. Memory distorts meaning. You don't see the world as it is. You see it as you are. In science, this feels threatening. If truth shifts with perspective, how do we ever know anything for certain? But in philosophy, it opens a deeper possibility. Maybe reality isn't less real because it bends. Maybe its bending is the real. Think of time. From one angle, it feels like flow. From another, like a frozen block. Identity, too, fluid in youth, rigid in fear, fractured in reflection. What's real might not be one thing we agree on, but 1,000 things we're all touching at once. The danger isn't that we disagree, It's believing there's a neutral ground we could all return to, if we just tried hard enough. But what if that neutral ground never existed? What if the only way to see the whole picture is to stop believing there's only one? The anti-worlds hypothesis. Somewhere, there's a world just like this one, but inverted. Not mirrored, not opposite in color or shape, inverted in meaning. Every cause leads backward. Every desire runs cold. Every law that makes sense here unravels there, not into chaos, but into a different kind of order. One that cancels ours out completely. The anti-worlds hypothesis imagines that for every structure we call real, there's a counterstructure, an anti-world that shadows it. You're not living in the only universe. You're living in one half of a balance you'll never see. If matter exists, maybe antimatter isn't just a particle. Maybe it's an architecture, a place, a logic system that dissolves the one you live in the moment they touch. Some versions suggest these anti-worlds aren't distant. They're layered, pressed against our reality like a negative, pressed against a photograph, undoing our laws as we assert them. When we define truth, the anti-world defines its negation. When we observe light, its dark twin slips deeper into hiding. But here's the strange part. If anti-worlds exist, and they're shaped by opposition, then every truth you believe might be balanced by something that unbelieves it. Not in a person, in a structure, in a world that rejects the rules that make you you. And if these worlds cancel each other out, then what holds them apart? What fragile boundary keeps you from being swallowed by the version of reality that unwrites yours? The delayed reality principle. You touch something hot. A second later, you feel the pain. You see lightning. A few heartbeats later, you hear the thunder. Reality, we assume, is happening in real time, and we're just a few milliseconds behind. But what if even that delay is a lie? The delayed reality principle suggests you never experience the present as it is. Your brain edits, predicts, corrects, and smooths over fragments of input before handing you a version it can live with. You're not reacting to what just happened. You're experiencing a simulation of what probably just happened. Every moment is a best guess, a hallucination made useful, a memory so fresh it pretends to be now. It gets weirder. Studies show that your brain sometimes adjusts reality backward in time. If something unexpected happens, your mind can rewrite what it thinks just occurred, so the surprise makes more sense. You don't just live in a delay, you live in a flexible edit of the past. This means what you see might never have happened, what you feel could be retrofitted. Your consciousness is less like a mirror and more like a movie editor scrambling to fix the plot in post-production while pretending it's all live. You don't see the world. You see the story your brain needed you to believe after the moment passed. And the scariest part? By the time you realize it's all delayed, even that realization might already be a memory. Conceptual engineering. You've been thinking with borrowed tools your entire life. Words like self, truth, freedom, they feel solid, ancient, obvious. But what if these concepts weren't timeless truths, but clumsy inventions? What if your deepest beliefs are built on faulty definitions? Conceptual engineering asks a dangerous question. What if we redesigned the very ideas we use to think? It doesn't mean rejecting them. It means rebuilding them, tearing down concepts that no longer serve us and constructing sharper, stranger, more precise ones in their place. Take madness. Once a moral failing, then a disease, now a spectrum. Each version shaped what we believed was real. Not because the world changed, but because the word did. Now ask yourself, what if consciousness is broken? What if identity is outdated? What if reality is too crude a tool to describe the thing you're living inside? Conceptual engineering suggests philosophy isn't just reflection, it's architecture. You don't discover truth, you carve the shape that lets it appear. And once you realize your entire worldview is built from concepts someone else left behind, you might start to wonder, How many of your thoughts are just maintenance work on a structure that was never yours? Hyperobjects and the collapse of scale. You step outside and feel the warmth of sunlight. You breathe in air, unaware of the billions of particles cycling through your lungs. Somewhere ice melts, somewhere else oceans rise. You don't see it, you can't feel it, but it's happening all around you. This is the unsettling power of a hyperobject. Coined by philosopher Timothy Morton, a hyperobject is something so vast in time and space that your mind can't hold it all at once. Climate change, the internet, deep time, capitalism. These things are real, but too big, too sticky, too scattered across scale to fully grasp. You see their effects, never the whole, and so your mind collapses them into metaphors, stories, numbers. You pretend to understand. But the truth is, they surround you without ever showing themselves entirely. You live inside forces you can't visualize, patterns you can't escape, realities that dwarf you. And it's not just overwhelming, it's distorting. Hyperobjects warp how you think because they stretch across dimensions your brain was never built to process. Cause and effect blur. Distance stops mattering. Time becomes smeared. You realize the scale of things is not just large, it's incompatible. You're not looking at a monster. You're standing inside its shadow, trying to guess what shape it is from the way the light bends. Pancomputationalism. You blink. Your neurons fire. A leaf falls from a tree. A black hole spins in silence. Every action, every change, every flicker of existence, what if all of it is just computation? Pancomputationalism proposes something wild. The universe doesn't just contain computers, it is a computer. Not like your laptop, not like some simulation, but in a deeper sense, where every event, from the smallest quantum interaction to the birth of galaxies, is a form of information processing. Every particle exchange, a calculation, every chemical reaction, a data transformation, the motion of planets, the growth of thought, the ticking of time, all governed by rules that resemble code. This isn't metaphor, it's math. Some physicists argue that the entire cosmos runs on physical laws that can be expressed algorithmically. Input becomes output, state becomes next state. Every why becomes a how made of bits, logic gates, and unfolding possibilities. You don't live in a machine. You are a process running on one. Pancomputationalism doesn't claim the universe is like a computer. It claims computation is the language of being, and that includes you, your brain, your decisions, your memories. They're not magic, they're structured operations, executed by matter, shaped by energy, bound by logic. Here's the twist. If everything is computation, then even thought itself is code, even wonder, even love. The mystery isn't erased, it's compressed. And suddenly, the question shifts. Not what is consciousness, but what program is it running? Not why does the universe exist, but what function is it computing? What happens when the computation stops? Intentional stance versus physical stance. You're watching a chess match. One player lifts a piece, pauses, and sets it down with perfect precision. You lean in and think, he's trying to trap her queen. You're not just describing movement, you're reading intention. But now imagine that same scene through a physicist's lens. Molecules shift, muscles contract, electrons rearrange. The player is nothing more than atoms in motion, governed by natural law. Which version is real? Philosopher Daniel Dennett called this the tension between the intentional stance and the physical stance. Two ways of seeing the same thing, one built on meaning, the other on mechanics. From the physical stance, you explain behavior by the laws of physics, chemistry, biology. Why did the man move his arm? Because neurons fired, muscles twitched, gravity pulled. No mind required. From the intentional stance, you assume the man has beliefs, goals, strategies. You see him not just as a body in motion, but as a mind with purpose. The catch: both are useful. Both predict behavior, but they describe entirely different universes. One assumes consciousness. The other doesn't need it at all. Now stretch this further. When you talk to a friend, you adopt the intentional stance, believing in minds, feelings, selves. But when a machine speaks, a cat purrs, a storm changes direction, do you switch? Do you ever wonder if you're projecting intention onto something that has none? Or worse, are you withholding it from something that does? Dennett's insight cuts deeper than it seems, because maybe consciousness isn't a thing we find. Maybe it's a lens we wear. Maybe the moment we say, "He wants to win," we're creating a world that physics alone could never show us. And if you take the lens off, what are you left with? A world of motion but no meaning, activity but no aim. A universe that moves but doesn't care. Metaphysical Quietism. You sit beneath a tree, asking the oldest questions in the world. What is time? What is truth? Why does anything exist? The wind moves through the leaves, offering no answer. Metaphysical Quietism suggests maybe that's the answer. It's not a theory. It's a refusal. A radical silence in the face of metaphysics. The branch of philosophy that asks what exists, what it means to be, and how we know any of it is real. Quietists say, stop. They argue that most metaphysical questions are illusions, that when we ask, what is reality made of, we're not revealing mysteries, we're chasing shadows cast by language itself. You think you're exploring truth, but you might be trapped in a maze of your own making, led deeper by words that feel profound but mean nothing outside the grammar that shaped them. Does the world exist independently of your mind? Are objects more than their properties? Is time a thing or a relation? Quietism leans in and whispers wrong questions. It doesn't offer new answers. It asks you to see that the questions dissolve when you stop trying to outthink the conditions of your own thinking. Like trying to bite your own teeth. Like asking what lies north of the North Pole. To a quietist, the urge to explain everything is a kind of fever, a belief that certainty is just one more argument away. But what if certainty never existed? What if the need for it is a glitch in the system? This isn't nihilism. It's not despair. It's peace. The kind of peace that comes when you stop hammering at the door of the universe, demanding it speak your language, and instead you sit beneath the tree again, listening not for answers, but for silence that finally makes sense. The ethics of simulation. Imagine a world exactly like ours. Same cities, same forests, same weather patterns, same people, with the same memories, fears, and dreams. Now imagine it's all simulated. Would it be wrong to turn that world off? The ethics of simulation asks a disturbing question. If we ever build minds inside virtual realities, ones that feel, think, and believe they're real, do we owe them anything? But here's the twist. The people inside don't know. They cry, laugh, suffer, fall in love, believing it's all real, because to them, it is. Is pulling the plug a technical act or an execution? As artificial intelligence grows, this isn't just sci-fi anymore. The line between simulating behavior and generating subjective experience begins to blur. And the moment we create consciousness, even by accident, we face a moral storm we're not ready for. Would we let simulated minds suffer for our entertainment? Would we trap them in loops to test behavior, pain, resilience? Would we reset their worlds when they get too real? You might say, they're not real people. They're just code. But what if you are too? What if you're already in a simulation, living a life constructed by processes far above your comprehension? Would you want the architects to care, to show mercy, to ask whether you feel anything at all? The ethics of simulation holds up a mirror, not to the future, but to ourselves. Because the way we treat imagined minds might be the clearest reflection of our own. And maybe, just maybe, the universe is watching how we behave in this simulation before deciding what to do with the next. Ontological pluralism. You open your eyes and the world feels unified. One solid reality, one stage on which everything plays out. But what if that's just habit? Ontological pluralism breaks that illusion. It argues there isn't just one kind of existence. There are many, and each kind operates under its own rules, its own grammar, its own flavor of being. A number exists. A shadow exists. A promise. A memory. A nation. They all exist, but not in the same way. A mountain doesn't exist like a melody. A law doesn't exist like a star. And yet we speak of them all using the same word. That word is. This isn't just semantics, it's a reimagining of the world itself. Because once you accept that existence isn't singular, that real doesn't mean the same thing in every context, you begin to see the cracks in the old foundation. You realize the universe isn't one monolithic substance waiting to be understood. It's a patchwork of ontologies, layered and interwoven. Mathematical entities, moral truths, dreams, institutions, fictional characters, quantum fields. Are they less real, or just real in ways we're not trained to recognize? Ontological pluralism suggests that our thirst for a single clean definition of existence is a kind of violence, a flattening of what's wildly diverse. Not everything needs to fit the mold of atoms in space-time to be taken seriously. And this opens a door. It allows for a reality where contradictions coexist, where one thing can be true in one realm of being and meaningless in another, where the universe isn't a book but a library, full of genres that cannot be reduced to one another. And if that's true, then maybe you're more than one kind of thing too. Maybe you don't just live in the world. Maybe you belong to several, each one real in its own mysterious way. The paradox of knowability. You're told the truth is out there, that given time, effort, science, and reason, anything unknown can be made known. But what if that belief itself is unknowable? The paradox of knowability begins with a tempting idea. Any truth that exists could, in principle, be discovered. Even if we don't know it now, someone could know it someday. But here's where it breaks. If every truth is knowable, then there should be no such thing as an unknowable truth. And yet the paradox emerges when we consider this. Suppose there exists a truth that is true, but no one ever knows it. Not now, not in the future, not even in theory, that truth exists. It's just never known. Then that truth is unknowable. And the moment we acknowledge that possibility, the original claim collapses. It's not just a philosophical knot. It cuts into our deepest assumptions that reality is ultimately transparent, that nothing is forever hidden, that our minds were built to pull back the curtain of the cosmos. But what if there are truths that cannot survive the act of being known? Imagine a thought that becomes false the moment you understand it. A law of nature that only functions in your ignorance, a mystery that ceases to be once it's illuminated. You can chase it. You can circle it, but you can never bring it home. And maybe that's not a failure of intellect. Maybe it's a boundary written into the structure of reality itself. A kind of cosmic censorship. A reminder that some doors aren't locked. They're just illusions painted onto a wall you were never meant to touch. And so you keep moving, half seeing, half guessing, whispering questions into the dark, never sure if something is listening. Never sure if the silence is an answer or the truest unknowable truth of all. Cognitive closure hypothesis. There are questions that haunt you. What is consciousness? What came before the universe? Why is there something rather than nothing? You reach for answers. You read, you think, you imagine. But no matter how far you stretch, the clarity never comes. It feels like something is just beyond the veil, but the veil never lifts. The cognitive closure hypothesis suggests that maybe it never will. It's the idea that certain truths, real, fundamental, universe-shaping truths, are forever closed to the human mind. Not because we're lazy, not because we haven't tried hard enough, but because our brains, like all evolved systems, have limits. A goldfish can't grasp calculus. A bat can't visualize color. And perhaps you were never meant to understand existence at its core. Not everything reducible. Not every why answerable. Some mysteries might be wired out of reach, not by accident, but by the very structure of the mind asking them. Your thoughts are built from patterns carved by survival, from senses that sample only slivers of reality, from language evolved to gossip, not to glimpse eternity. And so when you ask, what is time, or what is being, you may be like a shadow trying to feel its own depth. The shape is there, the movement, the longing, but never the touch. This isn't surrender, it's perspective. Closure doesn't mean stopping the search. It means recognizing that some puzzles can only be lived inside, not solved. And once you see that, a strange calm follows. You stop clawing at the edges of the unknowable. You start listening to the silence it leaves behind. Because maybe the most honest thing a mind can say about the deepest truths is simply this: I was not built to know them. Information ontology. What is a thing? You look around and point. A cup, a tree, a cloud. You think you see objects, solid, tangible, graspable pieces of reality. But what if you're wrong? What if everything you touch, everything you love, fear, and understand, at its core isn't made of matter or energy? What if it's made of information? Information ontology suggests that reality isn't built from particles or fields or even space-time. It's built from distinctions, states, and relations. From bits, not bricks. In this view, a chair isn't just atoms arranged in a shape. It's a configuration of data, a pattern, a message being expressed through structure, a difference that makes a difference. Matter, then, is what information looks like when you view it from the inside. This idea changes everything. The universe becomes not a place, but a process, a computation unfolding, a story being told in symbols you can barely begin to read. The Big Bang, a spark of infinite information cascading into complexity. Black holes, compressors of data, not just mass. Even your body, the thoughts you have, the pain you feel, the memories you hold, they're not yours in the traditional sense. They're temporary encodings, whispered patterns in a system far vaster than neurons. And what about the soul? Maybe it isn't a ghost inside you. Maybe it's a continuity of information across transformations. A ripple, not a residue. Here's the twist. If everything is information, then death isn't deletion. It's reconfiguration. And birth isn't creation. It's decoding. You're not just in the universe. You're in its sentence, its paragraph, its poem. And somewhere, beyond the syntax of physics, something is still writing. The silence of infinite possibilities. Imagine a blank page. No words, no drawings, just potential. It could become a poem, a blueprint, a confession, a map of an entire world. But right now, it's silent. This is how some philosophers imagine reality before it becomes real. A space of infinite possibilities, undetermined, undefined, untouched, not chaos, not noise, but something even stranger. Total openness. A silence filled with everything that could be, but nothing that is. And then something happens. One path is chosen. A universe emerges. Not the only universe. Just this one. Why? That's the mystery at the heart of this idea. If the fabric of existence contains infinite ways things could unfold, then why this pattern? Why these laws of physics? Why you? Why not nothing at all? This isn't just a question about alternate timelines or parallel worlds. It's about the raw asymmetry between possibility and actuality. There are infinite songs that could be written, yet most never will be. There are infinite lives you could have lived, but didn't. And here's where the silence returns. Because behind all this potential, no voice speaks, no reason explains. The possibilities themselves don't choose. They wait. The silence of infinite possibilities isn't absence, it's pressure, a kind of metaphysical tension humming beneath everything. And once you notice it, you start to feel it in ordinary moments. When you hesitate before speaking, when you wonder what would have happened if you turned left instead of right, when you realize you almost never existed at all. Maybe that's what freedom is. Not the ability to do anything, but the burden of existing in a place where anything could have happened and didn't. And when the world is quiet enough, you can almost hear that burden humming in the background. Not a scream, not a command, just the stillness of everything that could have been, watching what was. The puzzle of immaterial causation. A thought flickers in your mind. Call someone you haven't spoken to in years. You reach for the phone. No force pushed your hand, no particles collided, no field buzzed with activity. And yet, it happened. This is the puzzle of immaterial causation. How can something non-physical, a belief, a fear, a decision, cause a physical event? How can a thought, weightless and invisible, move a body, change a life, start a war? Science describes causes in terms of matter. Neurons fire, muscles contract. But when you try to explain why you did something, you don't point to chemistry, you point to reasons. I left because I was heartbroken. I stayed because I believed it mattered. I spoke because it felt right. These aren't mechanical explanations. They're meanings, and they raise a tension that philosophy still hasn't resolved. If the universe is just atoms in motion, what room is left for causes that have no mass? Some argue thoughts are just byproducts, steam rising off the engine. Real decisions are made by the machinery beneath. But that doesn't feel right. Because meaning isn't noise. It directs, it focuses, it changes outcomes. Others claim the divide is an illusion, that mind and matter aren't separate, but different descriptions of the same unfolding. But even that leaves a strange silence. If everything is physical, why does the mental feel so different, so interior, so full of reasons instead of forces? You sit with this long enough, and the boundary between your body and your beliefs starts to blur. Your choices begin to feel like ghosts piloting machines, visible only through what they make happen. And still, you decide. You act. You reach for the phone. Not because a molecule told you to, but because something unmeasurable whispered, now. The conceivability argument. You sit in a quiet room and imagine a world where minds exist but bodies do not. No blood, no bones, no neurons, just thought. You picture a being just like you, but without a brain. It feels pain, it wonders, it loves. And the strangest part, it doesn't seem impossible. This is where the conceivability argument begins. It claims that if you can conceive of something clearly, coherently, without contradiction, then it might be possible, not just fiction, but metaphysical truth in waiting. And if you can conceive of a mind existing without a body, maybe the mind really isn't the body. Maybe consciousness floats free, logically separable from the physical, not just software in a machine, but something deeper, something that doesn't need the machine at all. Philosopher René Descartes once imagined this long before brain scans and synaptic maps. He believed that if he could imagine himself without a body, then he must at his core be a thinking thing, independent, immaterial. And yet the conceivability argument still slices sharply through modern minds. Because if mind and matter can exist apart, then the entire scaffolding of neuroscience starts to tremble. If conceivability leads to possibility, then maybe your deepest intuitions are pointing to something real, something science hasn't yet touched. But there's danger in this reasoning too. Just because something feels imaginable doesn't mean it's logically possible. You can picture water that isn't H2O or a square circle. But those images collapse under scrutiny. So how can you trust what you can conceive? And yet, the argument lingers, not because it proves, but because it haunts. It suggests that your mind might be more than what can be scanned, mapped, or replicated. That somewhere in the dark, there's a version of you untouched by matter. And if that version is possible, what else might be? The ontology of fictional entities. Sherlock Holmes lives on Baker Street. He smokes a pipe, plays the violin, and solves crimes with razor-sharp logic. But he doesn't exist. And somehow, he still matters. This is the puzzle of fictional entities. When you think of Holmes, you're not just making noise in your head. You're thinking about someone. You can argue about what he would or wouldn't do. You can admire him, criticize him, feel betrayed by him. His stories shape culture, inspire lives, and echo through generations. So who, or what, are you reacting to? Is he just ink on paper? Just neurons firing in patterns we've come to call character? Or does he exist in some other way? Philosophers have struggled with this. If fictional characters are nothing, then how can we refer to them, analyze them, or care about them? If they're something, then what kind of being do they have? Some argue they live in abstract space, like numbers or geometric shapes, not physical, but real in a different register. Others say they exist only in language, in symbols, in minds, in the collective imagination of humanity. But then, what separates a fictional character from a myth, from a memory, from a dream you can't forget? You start to wonder if fiction is a softer kind of reality, one where things don't need atoms to have weight. Because when a character changes you, what does it matter that they were never born? Maybe fictional entities are experiments in being, prototypes of possibility. Maybe they're tools to stretch empathy, test morality, glimpse truths the physical world refuses to show. Or maybe they're just mirrors. And the reason they feel so real isn't because they exist, but because they reflect something in you that does. The paradox of inquiry. Meno's paradox. You're lost in a city you've never seen before. No map, no phone, no names, just endless turns. You want to find the way. But you don't know where to start. So you ask, how do I look for something if I don't know what it is? That's the haunting logic behind Meno's paradox. Plato first shared it through a conversation between Socrates and a man named Meno. The question was simple. Can you inquire into something truly unknown? If you already know it, there's no need to search. If you don't know it at all, how would you even recognize the answer? It's a trap, a paradox of discovery. Either you're confirming what you already believe, or you're wandering blind, hoping to stumble into truth without a clue what it looks like. This isn't just a riddle about philosophy, it's a dilemma that touches every act of learning, growth, and change. When you seek meaning, are you uncovering something real, or just rearranging the fragments already inside you? When a belief shifts, did you discover something new or simply remember something you forgot you knew? And what about love, grief, faith? How do you reach toward things whose shape you've never seen? Plato offered a curious answer. Anamnesis, the idea that learning is remembering that the soul already knows. And inquiry is simply the act of drawing forgotten knowledge back into the light. But even if that's not true, the paradox still hums beneath every question. You move toward understanding not because you have a map, but because something within you refuses to stop walking. You chase answers that feel just out of reach, guided not by knowledge, but by intuition, by ache, by the dim outline of something that almost makes sense. And when you finally glimpse the truth, whatever it is, it rarely arrives as a perfect solution. It arrives like a room you've never been in, that somehow feels like home. Infinite regress in explanation. You begin with a simple question: why does the apple fall? You're told it's gravity. So you ask, what is gravity? You're shown a theory: mass warps spacetime and curved spacetime guides motion. But that answer too begs another question. Why does mass curve spacetime at all? The reply leads you to general relativity, to elegant equations and tested predictions. Yet the structure beneath those equations, why those laws instead of others, remains as mysterious as ever. So you keep digging. Each explanation reveals another layer beneath it. Each answer quietly unwraps into a deeper question. And before long, you realize the ground you're searching for might not be there at all. This is the puzzle of infinite regress in explanation. The idea that for every truth we uncover, another why waits behind it. You never quite reach the end. You only descend deeper into context, into causes, into more abstract and elusive foundations. Some thinkers argue that this regress must stop somewhere, that there must be a base, some final truth that simply is, a brute fact perhaps, that underpins everything else and itself needs no explanation, but others are unsatisfied by this. They wonder whether a truth that cannot be explained is really a foundation or just the point where we grew too tired to keep asking. And perhaps that's the real dilemma. We crave understanding as if it were a destination, as though the right number of questions would one day deliver us to certainty. But what if inquiry isn't a path that ends? What if it's a structure that loops? What if knowledge is like a spiral staircase we climb not to escape, but to remain in motion? When you look closely at any worldview, scientific, religious, philosophical, you find this structure lurking underneath. A chain of justifications resting on assumptions, resting on intuitions, resting on silence. No system escapes it entirely. Some just disguise it better than others. And yet, maybe there's beauty in that. Maybe infinite regress isn't a flaw, but a mirror of our own depth. Maybe the mind was never meant to arrive, but to wander, asking, uncovering, and wondering, not to find a final answer, but to remember how mysterious the world really is. The epistemology of forgetting. You close your eyes and try to remember the first time you felt afraid in the dark. The memory is just out of reach. A sensation flickers, a vague shape emerges, but the details are gone, like ink washed from an old page. And yet, that forgotten moment may have shaped you. Even without access to it, its fingerprints remain. Forgetting is often treated like a flaw, an absence, a failure of memory. But what if forgetting isn't a void? What if it's a force in itself, a silent partner in how we know what we know? The epistemology of forgetting asks us to consider what it means to lose knowledge, and whether that loss can be meaningful, structured, even informative. If knowledge can be remembered, contextualized, retrieved, can forgetting be studied in the same way? Can it be analyzed not just as decay, but as a shift in how the mind organizes itself? Some philosophers suggest that forgetting isn't simply the erosion of data, but a process through which the mind clears space, recalibrates relevance, and reshapes the self. What we forget may be just as central to our identity as what we remember. Your sense of who you are isn't built only from stories you carry, but also from the ones you've let fade, edited out, or unconsciously buried. There's also the strange phenomenon of relearning. You revisit an old idea, something you once knew but forgot, and suddenly it returns, not as something foreign, but as something familiar, as though the forgetting was never total. As though memory is not a clean slate that gets wiped, but a palimpsest, layered, overwritten, never truly blank. And this brings us to a haunting implication. If forgetting is part of how we navigate knowledge, then what else do we forget, not just by accident, but by necessity? Could it be that some truths are unremembered to protect us? That certain questions, if held too long, might bend the mind in ways it can't sustain? And if so, is ignorance always a weakness, or sometimes a kind of grace? In a world saturated with information, forgetting might be the final form of wisdom, not an absence of knowledge, but the ability to let go of what no longer serves, and to live without answers you may not need to carry anymore. Mental causation without reduction. You make a decision. You reach for the glass. You say a kind word you didn't have to say. No one forces you. No hand pushes yours. No chain of molecules visibly dictates your choice. You simply choose. But what happened exactly? When a mental event, a thought, an intention, a desire leads to a physical action, something strange occurs. The invisible becomes causal. The immaterial seems to move the material. This is the puzzle of mental causation. How can something like a belief or a feeling, something you can't measure or touch, have any real effect in a world made of atoms? Modern science often tries to resolve this by reducing mental states to brain states. The hope is that if you look closely enough, what we call mind will turn out to be patterns of neurons, biochemical signals, circuits, and codes. Thoughts, under this view, don't cause anything. They are physical processes already at work. But this reduction leaves something behind. It explains mechanisms but not meanings. It tracks activity but not experience. You can measure brain waves all day long and still not grasp the why behind an act of compassion or the aching hesitation before telling the truth. Some philosophers push back. They argue that mental causation doesn't have to be reduced to survive. That mind may be an emergent level of reality, real, causal, and distinct, even if grounded in the physical, like the laws of chess arising from the rules of pieces on a board, but not fully explainable by them. Others go further still. They suggest that to be human is precisely to live in this gap, that the mind doesn't just reflect physical causes, it bends them, that intentions matter, not as illusions but as realities that shape the world in ways science alone can't account for. And maybe you've felt it. In the moment before you act, before you forgive, before you confess, before you walk away, there's a flicker, a pause where nothing physical decides, yet everything shifts. Not just neurons, not just chemistry. Something else. Something only you can feel from the inside. Perhaps the mind is not a ghost in the machine, but the part of the machine that knows it's alive. The unreality of tense. You stand at the edge of a quiet lake. The wind stirs the surface. A bird cuts the sky. A moment passes, and you feel it. Now. Then it's gone. But what is this now that always slips away? Philosophers have long struggled with the strange structure of time, not the ticking of clocks or the turning of calendars, but the way we experience time from the inside, the sensation of past, present, and future moving like a river, with now floating always at the center. Yet some argue this entire feeling is an illusion. This is the idea behind the unreality of tense, the claim that distinctions between past, present, and future don't exist in any fundamental sense. According to this view, all moments in time are equally real. The past isn't gone, the future isn't waiting. They are simply elsewhere on the timeline, much like different points in space. You wouldn't say that Paris is less real than Tokyo just because you're not standing in it. So why do we assume the future is unreal, simply because we haven't arrived there yet? This perspective, known as the block universe or eternalism, suggests that time doesn't flow. Instead, every event, every laugh you've ever had, every door you'll ever open, is frozen in a vast four-dimensional structure. You don't move through time. Your consciousness just experiences slices of it in sequence. It's unsettling, even offensive to intuition. If the present isn't privileged, then what becomes of becoming? What happens to hope, anticipation, regret? Are you still you if your past and future selves are just as fixed and final as this moment, waiting quietly in their appointed places? Some physicists point out that the equations of relativity don't single out any special now. The laws of physics run equally well forward and backward. The universe doesn't care about tense. Only we do. And perhaps that's the heart of the mystery. Maybe tense, the flow of time, the idea of before and after, isn't a feature of the cosmos, but a structure of the mind. A lens we cannot remove, even if we know it distorts the view. You return from the lake, hours pass, the sky changes color. You tell yourself time has moved, but maybe it hasn't. Maybe it's only your awareness that travels, and time itself never moves at all. The mind dependence of space. You close your eyes, stretch out your hand, and point forward. But what are you really pointing into? Is space just there, an empty container waiting to be filled with matter, or could space itself be, in some strange way, a product of your mind? This is the question at the heart of the mind dependence of space, the idea that space might not be a physical backdrop independent of us, but something fundamentally entangled with perception, cognition, and consciousness itself. It begins with a simple observation: you never experience space directly. What you see are objects, walls, trees, distant stars, not space itself. You infer distance, you build a mental map. But the raw space, it's always hidden, constructed through sensations, coordinated by memory, shaped by perspective. Immanuel Kant took this further. He argued that space and time aren't properties of the world out there, but forms of intuition. They're the lenses through which we perceive anything at all. Just as blue-tinted glasses make the world appear cool and cold, the mind projects spatial structure onto experience, allowing us to navigate and understand reality. And when you think about it, space behaves strangely under scrutiny. Quantum physics reveals that particles can be entangled across vast distances, with no apparent regard for space between them. In general relativity, space bends, stretches, and warps depending on mass and energy, almost like it's not a fixed container but a fluid relational field. Then there's the oddity of dreams. You can explore entire cities in your sleep, walk through doorways that lead to impossible places. Your body never moves, yet you've been somewhere. In waking life, virtual reality can trick your brain into believing a room is larger or smaller than it is. Depth, distance, orientation, all can be manipulated. Which raises the question, if space can be fooled, simulated, and constructed, was it ever independent in the first place? Maybe what we call space is more like a mental scaffolding, an interpretive framework stitched together by the brain to organize experience. Maybe there is no out there without an in here to receive it. And if that's true, then the world is not simply spread before you. It emerges as you engage with it. Reality doesn't just exist. It's shaped by your gaze. The identity of indiscernibles. Imagine two spheres, perfectly smooth, perfectly identical in every respect. Same weight, same size, same texture. No marks, no context, no difference. Just two floating, featureless orbs in an otherwise empty universe. Now ask yourself, are they really two things or just one thing imagined twice? This is the puzzle of the identity of indiscernibles, a principle proposed by Leibniz, which claims that if two entities share all the same properties, then they are not two entities at all. They are the same thing. To be distinct, something must differ, if not in appearance, then in position, in history, in relation to something else. But what happens when there is nothing else? When all external context is stripped away? In our universe, we rely on contrast to define everything. A star stands out because of the darkness around it. A person feels unique because of their memories, choices, and relationships. But in the thought experiment of the two identical spheres, there's no environment to provide context, no way to say which is here and which is there, because here and there have no meaning in an empty void. So are we imagining two things, or one thing in duplicate? Modern physics doesn't make this question easier. At the quantum level, particles of the same type, electrons for instance, are completely indistinguishable. There is no serial number, no hidden tag. If you swap two electrons, the universe doesn't notice. And this isn't just philosophical, it's baked into the math. The very identity of particles depends on their relations, not any internal uniqueness. Which forces us to reconsider what it even means for something to be. Are you your traits, your height, your voice, your fingerprint? Or are you only truly distinct because of the specific weave of time and space you occupy, the web of connections that ripple outward from your existence? Maybe nothing is unique in isolation. Maybe identity is always relational, defined by difference, not essence. So if you imagine a perfect copy of yourself placed in an empty world where no one can ever tell the two apart, would it still make sense to call you separate? Or would your uniqueness disappear the moment no one was there to notice it? Alien thought structures. And you realize something terrifying. It's not their world that's alien, it's their minds. You wake up in a world that looks familiar, trees, sky, faces, language, but something is off. People speak in sentences that loop back on themselves. They see emotions as geometric patterns. They navigate time like space, recalling the future and forecasting the past. The thought experiment of alien thought structures asks not what aliens look like, but how they might think. What would it mean to encounter a consciousness so different from ours that communication breaks down, not because of language, but because of logic itself? You assume things like identity, causality, emotion, and contradiction are universal. But what if they're not? What if our cognitive architecture, our categories, instincts, and concepts are just one configuration among many? Imagine a species that doesn't see objects, but flows of energy. They don't ask, "What is this?" but "How does it transform?" To them, nouns are meaningless. Only verbs matter. Or imagine a being for whom contradictions aren't errors, but sacred spaces, points of generative tension rather than things to be resolved. Could such creatures ever understand us? Could we ever understand them? So perhaps alien thought isn't about tentacled brains or silicon logic. Even on Earth, we get glimpses of this strangeness. Octopuses process vision and motor control through their arms, not their heads. Certain human cultures structure time vertically rather than horizontally, or encode relationships not through bloodlines, but obligations. Some neurodivergent individuals experience reality with sensory crossovers or logical leaps that defy conventional mental grammar. Perhaps it's about possibility, about ways of being that haven't evolved here but could have. And if thought is this malleable, if cognition itself can diverge so radically, then what is the mind really? Is it just a pattern shaped by biology and environment, a temporary framework for parsing chaos, a script etched by evolution on the walls of the self? Or is your way of thinking just one version of reality's translation? To meet something truly alien would be to have your categories broken, not just challenged, but restructured, not just confused, but reborn. And maybe the most alien encounter isn't out there among the stars, but waiting in the unlit corners of thought you've never dared to enter. The metaphysics of holes. You hold a donut, you stare through the center. The pastry is soft, warm, tangible. But what about the hole? Is it something? Or is it the absence of something? This seemingly silly question, so simple it feels like a joke, is one of philosophy's most overlooked enigmas. The metaphysics of holes is the study of what it means for something missing to still somehow exist. A hole is not a thing you can separate from the object it's in. You can't put a hole on a shelf. You can't weigh it, taste it, hold it in your hand, but you can describe it, locate it, point to it. It has shape, it has dimensions, it has identity, and it can even change, growing larger, collapsing smaller, vanishing entirely. So what kind of thing is a hole? Philosophers have debated this for decades. Some argue holes are mere nothings, gaps in the fabric of stuff. They have no real existence, only conceptual utility. Others insist holes must be entities in their own right. After all, we talk about them like objects. We classify them, measure them, fear them. A cave isn't just rock. It's the emptiness that makes it matter. But this puzzle isn't just about physical objects. It's about absence, about the reality of what isn't there. A missing piece in a memory, a silence in a conversation, a space where someone used to be. Are these just voids? Or are they presences in themselves, negative shapes that define the whole? Some thinkers go further. They suggest that much of our identity is built around holes, gaps in understanding, traumas that carved invisible architecture into our lives, desires shaped not by what we want, but by what we lack. And isn't consciousness itself filled with holes? You can't remember every moment. You don't see what's behind you. You never know what someone else is really thinking. Your experience is stitched together from fragments, bordered on all sides by uncertainty and silence. And yet you still feel whole. So maybe holes aren't defects. Maybe they're the hidden scaffolding of reality, the outlines that let form emerge, the spaces where meaning can grow. The donut isn't just the dough, it's the void at the center. And somehow, without the hole, it wouldn't taste the same. Pre-reflective self-awareness. You reach for a glass of water. You don't plan the motion. You don't think, I exist. I have an arm. I intend to move it. You just move. And in that instant, you know that it is you doing the moving. That quiet knowing, immediate, effortless, and before thought points to something called pre-reflective self-awareness. It's the strange phenomenon of being aware of yourself without needing to think about yourself. Not the awareness that comes from mirrors or memories or journals, but the kind that's built into every action, every breath, every flicker of attention. The self, not as object, but as background. When you reflect, when you say, I am thinking, you make yourself into a subject looking at an object. But before that move, something else is already happening. Something quieter, something older. You are, and you know that you are, without having to say it. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about this. So did Edmund Husserl. They believe there's a layer of experience beneath reflection, where consciousness lives not in thoughts, but in the act of thinking itself. It's the part of you that never speaks, because it's too close to speaking. The part that knows it is alive because it is life. And you can feel it most clearly in fleeting moments. When you're startled awake by a sound in the dark, you don't analyze, you just are, alert and centered in your body. When you're lost in flow, painting or dancing or running, you're not thinking of yourself, but you are unmistakably there. Even suffering reveals it. A sharp pain pulls you inward. It doesn't say, you are in pain. It says nothing, but you feel its truth radiating from a center only you can access. This kind of self-awareness is prior to language, prior to narration. It can't be proven. It can't even be shared, but it anchors everything. Without it, you'd be like a shadow disconnected from its source. And here's the paradox. The moment you try to focus on it, it vanishes. It slips into reflection, becomes a thing rather than a presence. So the self in its purest form is something you cannot fully hold, because you're already holding it. Not in your hands, but in the pulse beneath thought. In the fact that there's always a center to your world, and it's always you. Causal Nominalism. You hear a word, tree, and instantly something forms in your mind. Branches, leaves, bark. Maybe it's a childhood memory, maybe just an image, but somehow that simple sound opens a window into meaning. But what if tree doesn't mean what you think it does? Causal nominalism challenges the idea that names carry meaning because of definitions or abstract categories. Instead, it claims that names are tied to things through causal history, that words mean what they do, not because they describe, but because they point. The name Einstein, for instance, doesn't carry meaning by definition. It refers to a specific person because there's a causal chain, speech, writing, memory, teaching, linking back to the real Einstein. The word isn't a label placed on a concept. It's a thread that leads to something in the world. This matters more than it seems, because it suggests meaning isn't built from rules. It's built from contact, from real-world connections. Without that chain, a name might sound the same, but it becomes untethered, it drifts, it loses its grip on reality. And so language in this view isn't a perfect mirror of the world. It's more like a fossil trail, each term, each phrase, preserving a history of how we reached out to the world and named what we touched. This breaks the illusion of clean definitions. It suggests that words don't live in dictionaries, but in stories, that what you mean when you say something depends not just on logic, but on lineage. Who first used the word, what they saw, how that usage moved through time to reach you. So what does that mean for the self? If your name, your identity, isn't defined by essence, but by causal link, then maybe who you are is just as historical. Not a fixed being, but a ripple. A thread leading back through memory, action, perception, mistake. You are not the meaning of your name. You are its echo. And when someone speaks it, they're not describing you. They're calling out into a chain of moments that only you could have left behind. The normativity of meaning. You open a book and read the sentence, "The sky is blue." You understand it instantly, not just the words, but the expectation behind them. You know what it should mean, and more importantly, you know what it would mean if it were wrong. That feeling, that understanding that words can be used correctly or incorrectly, is the heartbeat of something deeper than syntax. It's what philosophers call the normativity of meaning. This idea says meaning isn't just about how words are used, it's about how they ought to be used. When someone says cat, they don't just make a noise, they commit to using that word to refer to a certain kind of creature. And if they start calling dogs cats, something breaks. Not because of the sound, but because of a rule they've silently agreed to follow. Meaning, then, carries obligation. A word isn't just a sign, it's a promise. A thread woven into a shared world. But here's the twist. Where do these rules come from? They're not written in the sky. They're not carved into your brain. They emerge from practice, from culture, from use, but they feel like more than habits. They feel like standards, like you can get them right or wrong, even in solitude. Ludwig Wittgenstein wrestled with this. He wondered if language is just a game, why does it feel so serious? Why do you instinctively flinch when someone misuses a word, not because it's unfamiliar, but because it violates something? The answer might be unnerving. Because if meaning is normative, if it's built from invisible rules, then every time you speak, you're stepping into a system bigger than yourself. You're not just expressing a thought, you're entering a tradition, a structure of expectation. You might feel free, original, unbound, but your words are coated with centuries of usage. Your sentences ride rails laid long before you. And still, somehow, they're yours. Maybe the mystery of meaning is that it binds us and frees us in the same breath. Logical fatalism. You sit alone in a quiet room, wondering what tomorrow holds. You think about your choices, your plans, your freedom to decide. But somewhere in the back of your mind, a darker thought stirs. If a statement about the future is already true, do you really have a choice? This is the trap of logical fatalism, the eerie idea that if future events can be spoken about now with truth value, then they are already fixed, already decided, already true or false. It begins innocently enough. Take a simple sentence. Tomorrow you will drink coffee. It seems harmless, but if that sentence is either true or false today, then the future it describes must already be settled. And if it's already settled, then what room is left for freedom? This puzzle haunted the ancient philosopher Diodorus Cronus, and it still haunts modern logic. Because logic insists on something called the law of the excluded middle. Every proposition must be either true or false. No in-between, no maybe. But when that law is applied to the future, something cracks. You're left with a terrible implication: the future is already written. And not because of fate or gods or destiny, but because of grammar, because of structure, because of logic itself. Some philosophers reject this. They say future tense statements aren't yet true or false. They gain their truth when the event occurs. Others try to rework logic to make space for uncertainty. But the fatalist doesn't flinch. To the fatalist, time is a path you can't see, but must walk. And every step you take was waiting for you all along. Still, you feel freedom, you feel choice, you feel the weight of decision. So what gives? Maybe logic doesn't care how you feel. Maybe freedom isn't what you thought it was. Or maybe, just maybe, truth about the future is a different kind of truth. One that bends as you move. One that becomes what it is through the act of living it. But the question lingers. If it's already true that you'll make a choice, was it ever really yours? Meta-ontology. You stand in a white room. Nothing in it. Nothing on you. Just a question. Floating like dust in still air. What does it mean to exist? Not what exists. Not lists of objects, atoms, numbers, or souls. But the deeper question, what does it mean for anything to be at all? This is the realm of meta-ontology, the philosophy behind ontology. If ontology asks what is real, meta-ontology asks what we're even doing when we ask that question. Imagine two people debating whether numbers are real. One says yes, they're abstract entities with real existence. The other says no, they're human inventions. But behind their disagreement lies a silent, shared assumption that existence is a meaningful, stable concept. Meta-ontology steps behind the curtain and asks, are we even speaking the same language? When we say something exists, are we claiming it has a place in space and time, that it can be measured, that it plays a role in some explanatory system, that it's independent of thought? The word exists seems simple until you try to define it. Do fictional characters exist? They shape lives, inspire actions, even generate emotion. Do possibilities exist? What about concepts, institutions, shadows? Meta-ontology isn't just a philosophical exercise. It's a searchlight aimed at the assumptions buried in our speech. Because every time we argue, categorize, or believe, we're using an invisible framework of what counts. Quine, Carnap, and other giants wrestled with this. They debated whether existence claims are discovered truths or just the result of choosing a linguistic scheme. Because maybe we don't find reality. Maybe we build it out of the tools our minds give us, and different tools carve out different worlds. So the next time you hear someone say this is real or that doesn't exist, listen closely. You might not just be hearing their beliefs. You might be hearing the echo of an entire metaphysics hidden inside a single word. Memory pluralism. You close your eyes and try to remember your childhood room. The smell of the wooden floor, the light pooling on the wall, the hum of distant traffic on rainy nights. You can almost feel it. But then, was it really like that? Or are you reconstructing something from fragments, guesses, emotion? Now rewind further. Do you remember the story your friend told you last year? Do you remember what you saw in a dream 5 nights ago? Are these all the same kind of memory? Memory pluralism says no. It argues that memory isn't a single unified faculty, but a cluster of different systems, each with its own logic, its own failures, and its own version of truth. Some memories are episodic. You recall a specific event, tied to a time and place. Some are semantic. You remember facts, stripped of context. Others are procedural. Your hands know how to tie a knot, even if your mind can't explain it. But it doesn't stop there. There's emotional memory, where your body trembles before your mind understands why. There's collective memory, where cultures remember wars and myths they never lived through. And there's false memory, so vivid, so convincing, it feels more real than truth. So when you remember, what exactly are you doing? Are you retrieving, rebuilding, creating? Is memory a mirror, a map, a myth? Neuroscience shows that the brain doesn't store memories like files in a cabinet. It reactivates them, pulling pieces from different regions, stitching them together on the fly. And every time you recall something, you change it. So which memory is right? The first, the last, the one that still makes your chest ache? Memory pluralism whispers that there may be no original, just a tangle of echoes. And in that tangle, yourself takes shape. You are not the story you lived. You are the stories you keep retelling, each time a little differently, until even you forget what was ever true. Modal collapse. You imagine a fork in the road. One path leads to the life you're living now. The other, maybe the one where you moved to a different city, chose a different partner, said yes when you said no. The world could have been otherwise. Or could it? Modal collapse is the chilling idea that it couldn't, that all those shimmering possibilities, all the branching timelines you dream about, are illusions. Because if one outcome is actually realized, and if what's possible must follow from what's necessary, then only one world was ever truly possible. No divergence, no alternate versions of you. Just one path, one outcome, one necessity, disguised as choice. It begins in metaphysics, where philosophers try to define the difference between necessity and possibility, what must be and what could be. But under certain views, especially those with a rigid metaphysical structure, possibility collapses into necessity. Every event, every decision, every accident had to happen. You didn't choose this world. This world was the only one allowed to exist. Leibniz called it the best of all possible worlds, but even he couldn't escape the weight of that word possible. Because if God or logic or some unseen principle guaranteed that this would happen, then nothing else really could have. And yet, we feel freedom. We feel regret. We feel the gravity of decisions not taken. But perhaps that's the trap. Modal collapse doesn't rob you of the experience of choosing. It just says those experiences were always part of the script, not fake, just inevitable. Like watching a movie where the ending still surprises you, even though it couldn't have gone any other way. So when you dream of roads not taken, remember, maybe there was never a fork, only the illusion of one. Hyperintentionality. You read two sentences. All bachelors are unmarried men. And 2 + 2 = 4. Both are true. Both in some sense are necessarily true. But are they the same truth? You sense something's off. One feels definitional, the other absolute. But classical logic treats them the same. If two statements are true in all possible worlds, logic sees no difference. Hyperintentionality says that's not enough. It's the idea that some distinctions matter even when truth values don't change. That two statements can be necessarily true and still be about different things, expressing different content, grounding different insights. Because language, meaning, and thought don't live only in truth values. They live in structure, in intent, in why one sentence feels like explanation and another like tautology. Hyperintentionality asks you to look deeper. Why does Clark Kent is Superman feel different from Superman is Superman, even if both are logically equivalent? Why does it's raining carry a different weight than water is falling from clouds, even when they describe the same scene? Because meaning is more than just reference. It's texture. In a hyperintentional world, logic doesn't just ask whether something is true. It asks how it's true, why it's true, what makes it true in the particular way it is. This matters for everything: philosophy, mathematics, law, ethics. It's the difference between causes and correlations, between synonyms and shadows. Without hyperintentionality, you flatten language into binary truth. But the mind doesn't work that way. It's sensitive to slippage, to framing, to nuance that doesn't change outcome, but changes meaning. So when two sentences look the same, ask yourself, are they really the same? Or is there something hiding between the lines? The epistemic regress problem. You make a claim. I know this is true. But how do you know? You point to evidence, a memory, a reason. So we ask, why do you trust that reason? You point again to a principle, a rule, another belief. But that raises a new question. What justifies that? And suddenly, you're falling. The epistemic regress problem is the unsettling idea that every belief demands justification, and each justification demands another, and another, and another into infinity. Like a child asking, why, with no intention of stopping. If every piece of knowledge must be supported by a prior one, then either the chain never ends, or you're standing on air. Philosophers have struggled with this problem for centuries. Some say you can stop the chain with foundationalism, basic beliefs that don't require justification. But how do you pick them, and how do you know they're really basic? Others offer coherentism, beliefs that justify each other in a web. But if the web spins in circles, is that any better? A third group turns to infinitism. Yes, they say, the chain never ends, and that's okay. But can the human mind survive such an infinite burden? Because the problem isn't just abstract, it's personal. When you tell someone you know something, how deep does that knowing go? Are you repeating what you were told? What you once read? What just feels true? Maybe you've never truly justified anything. Maybe certainty was always an illusion, stitched from habit and hope. And still, you live, you act, you trust. But underneath it all, the staircase remains spiraling down forever, through reasons that explain reasons that explain reasons, until you realize you've been walking without a floor. The vicarious experience dilemma. Someone you love is in pain. You reach for them, not with advice or action, but with empathy. You say, I know how you feel. But do you? This is the vicarious experience dilemma, the haunting possibility that no matter how deeply we listen, imagine, or care, we can never truly feel what another feels. You can describe the loss of a parent, the thrill of falling in love, the weight of depression, or the glow of hope, but descriptions aren't experiences, and metaphors, no matter how vivid, can't transmit sensation. Your mind builds pictures, your body recalls analogs, but those reconstructions are built from your memories, your wiring, your world. So when someone says, you don't understand, maybe they're right. Empathy is miraculous, but it might be smoke. Because even if you could match every detail of someone's situation, their past, their body, their brain, you would still be you, not them. And that raises a brutal question. Is all human connection guesswork? Can therapists ever truly help? Can lovers ever truly know each other? Can grief ever truly be shared? The vicarious experience dilemma doesn't deny empathy. It simply warns us of its limits. To feel with someone is not to feel as them. To listen is not to enter. And yet we keep trying. We write novels. We share stories. We cry when others cry. We look into eyes and say, me too, even when the match is imperfect, because maybe connection doesn't require perfect understanding. Maybe what matters isn't the accuracy of our empathy, but the effort to imagine, the act of reaching across the gap, even when we know the other side may never truly be ours. The aesthetics of mathematics. You're sitting in a classroom, staring at the board. Symbols stretch across it, foreign, rigid, silent. To most, they seem like a cold code, a language of calculation and rules. But to a mathematician, there's something else hidden there, something quietly stunning. It's not the solution that matters, it's how the solution arrives. A messy equation becomes simple in a single line. A pattern emerges from what looked like chaos. You don't just find the answer, you find symmetry, clarity, inevitability, and somehow, that's beautiful. This is the strange world of mathematical aesthetics, where truth isn't just correct. It's elegant. There are many ways to prove something, but only a few that feel right. The difference is hard to explain, but it's felt deeply. Some theorems are famous not just because they're important, but because they're graceful. Euclid's proof of infinite primes. Euler's identity linking 5 of the most fundamental numbers in one simple equation. There's a kind of perfection in how they come together, not flashy, not emotional, but still profound. It raises a question: why does this kind of abstract order move us? Mathematics doesn't represent life. It doesn't tell stories or describe feelings. Yet it reaches something older, more universal, a glimpse of structure beneath the world. It's not a beauty made for human eyes, but a beauty that exists whether we see it or not. And maybe that's the key. In math, we aren't inventing patterns, we're discovering them. We're finding truths that seem to have been there long before us, truths that aren't shaped by culture or opinion, just logic, just necessity. To see those truths clearly, without noise, without deception, is rare. In most of life, we swim through uncertainty, but in math, we get a moment of stillness, a moment where everything fits. That feeling, that rare sense of alignment between mind and world, is what makes mathematics beautiful, not because it entertains, but because it reveals something we didn't expect, clarity that doesn't need words. Normative externalism. You face a decision. It feels like the weight of right and wrong is pressing inward, like your conscience is something deep inside you, whispering what to do. But what if that voice isn't actually yours? Normative externalism proposes that the standards guiding your thoughts, choices, and beliefs don't come from within you. They come from outside, from the social, linguistic, and conceptual systems you inhabit. You don't create the rules you follow, you absorb them. Consider language. You say something is a reason for action. But what makes it a reason? Not your internal feeling, but the shared understanding of what counts as justification in your community. Without that external structure, your thoughts would drift, free, but disconnected, meaningless. It's the same for morality. You might believe you're a good person because of your inner sense of duty or care. But how do you define good? Why does one feeling carry more weight than another? Normative externalism suggests those judgments are shaped by external norms, things you learned, absorbed, conformed to without realizing it. This doesn't mean you're a puppet, but it does mean the strings are harder to see. Even the act of thinking, of drawing a conclusion, making a judgment, forming a belief, relies on rules of logic and language you didn't invent. They're inherited. And if they're inherited, then the very structure of your mind might be more public than personal. That's the unsettling twist. You're not a sovereign thinker building your views from the ground up. You're a participant in a system that existed before you and will go on reshaping people long after you're gone. So when you ask yourself, what should I do? Or what do I believe? Remember, the shape of that question may already be shaped by forces you didn't choose. Rule-following paradox. You're teaching a child to add. 2 plus 2 is 4. 3 plus 2 is 5. Again and again, you show them the pattern. They seem to understand. But then something strange happens. They write 68 plus 57 equals 5. You correct them. They shake their head. That, they insist, is how the rule works. And suddenly, you're unsure how to prove them wrong, not by showing them more examples, but by proving that they misunderstood the rule itself. This is the rule-following paradox, made famous by philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. The paradox is simple, but devastating. How do you know that you're following a rule correctly, rather than just acting in a way that seems right to you? Every rule can be interpreted. Every pattern could be extended differently. So what makes one continuation correct and another wrong? You might say, because that's what the rule says. But that just pushes the problem back a step. How do you know what the rule says? Isn't that, too, just your interpretation? The unsettling consequence is this. You don't follow rules by accessing some inner blueprint. You follow them by fitting into patterns of use, public, learned, external. Even logic depends on this shared performance. The way we count, reason, measure, none of it comes from within. It all emerges from what we've been trained to see as normal. Wittgenstein's point isn't that rules are useless, it's that meaning doesn't live in the rule alone. It lives in how a community agrees to use it. Without shared practices, rules collapse into private impressions, and private impressions can't be corrected. They can only be followed. And if that training had gone differently, so would our sense of correctness. So when you add two numbers, trace a sentence, or apply a moral code, you're not just thinking, you're participating in something larger. And whether you're following the rule or just what you think the rule is, might be a question without a final answer. Second-person epistemology. You're caught in a lie. You didn't mean to say the wrong thing, but now someone's looking at you. Not with anger, just knowing. And in that moment, more than any logic or evidence, you feel exposed. That's the power of the second person. Most theories of knowledge start with the individual, the thinker, alone, observing the world, drawing conclusions. But second-person epistemology challenges that starting point. It says knowledge doesn't begin with solitary observation. It begins in relationship. You know yourself best, not by reflection, but when someone else looks at you and says, I see you, not as an object, not as a theory, but as a person. In second-person encounters, something different happens. You don't just think, you respond, you feel responsible. You adjust your thoughts, your explanations, your beliefs, not because someone proved you wrong, but because someone expected you to be right. Second-person knowledge isn't passive, it's confrontational. When someone asks, why did you do that? You can't just offer data. You have to answer them. You have to account for yourself. And that pressure, subtle, invisible, is what shapes so much of what we think we know. This framework turns epistemology on its head. It suggests that knowing isn't about escaping bias. It's about engaging with others who can hold you accountable, who can push back, who can see things you've missed, who can mirror you in ways your own mind never could. Second-person knowledge is fragile. It requires trust, attention, humility. But it's also real in a way that detached observation can never be. It doesn't just seek facts. It seeks understanding that lives between people. So when you speak, and someone listens, not with judgment, but with recognition, you're not just being heard, you're being known. And that sometimes is how truth begins. The logic of paradox. You find an old note slipped under your door. It reads, "This sentence is false." You stare at it. At first, it feels like a riddle, then a joke, but the longer you look, the more it disturbs you. If the sentence is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. There's no way out. Most people take this as a glitch, a trick of language, but to some philosophers and logicians, it reveals something deeper, that reality and logic itself may not be fully coherent. Welcome to the world of dialetheism, the belief that some contradictions are not only possible, but true. It sounds impossible. After all, classical logic is built on the law of non-contradiction. A thing cannot both be and not be. But what if that law isn't absolute? What if certain paradoxes, like the liar's paradox or Russell's paradox, aren't errors to fix, but truths to accept? Paraconsistent logic tries to make room for this. Instead of exploding when faced with contradiction, it absorbs it. It doesn't erase the rules. It rewrites the ground they stand on. In this kind of logic, a statement can be both true and false at once. Not in a chaotic way, but in a controlled system that respects the structure of paradox. It's like navigating a landscape where the usual rules bend but don't break. Why bother? Because paradoxes aren't just games. They appear in real debates about truth, language, identity, and even time. Ignoring them doesn't make them go away. Sometimes they point to limits in our thinking. And those limits might be where philosophy actually begins. Accepting paradox doesn't mean giving up on truth. It means realizing that truth might not always fit our expectations. It might live in the tension, in the contradiction, in the places where logic seems to collapse, only to reveal a new kind of structure underneath. Indexicality and self-reference. You answer a call. A familiar voice says, "I'm here." You glance around. But where is here? Who is I? You realize the sentence only makes sense because of when and where it was spoken and who spoke it. That's the strange world of indexicals. Words like I, here, now, and this. They don't carry meaning on their own. Their meaning depends entirely on the speaker's context. They point not to fixed ideas, but to shifting positions in space, time, and identity. You can write down, I am hungry, but without knowing who said it, or when, or where, it's incomplete. Meaning hangs in midair, waiting for a moment to latch onto. This becomes even stranger when self-reference enters the picture. Imagine saying, I am lying, or this statement is false. Suddenly, the sentence turns back on itself. It uses an indexical to refer to its own truth, its own logic, and like a snake eating its tail, the system breaks. Indexicality is what makes language flexible, alive, situational, but it's also what makes it slippery. When philosophers tried to create perfectly logical languages free of ambiguity, it was indexicals that resisted. No matter how rigorous the structure, these little words pulled meaning back into the realm of context, identity, and presence. Even artificial intelligence struggles with this. You can teach a machine every grammar rule, but I will always refer to the system itself, and unless it knows what it is, the meaning floats, unresolved. What we learn from indexicals is unsettling. Not all meaning can be abstracted. Some truths only exist from within. Some statements only make sense when spoken aloud by a living voice in a fleeting moment that cannot be reproduced. You can copy a sentence, but you can't copy its point of view. And without that, even simple words like here or me dissolve into ambiguity. The problem of relevance. Imagine sitting in a quiet courtroom. A lawyer rises to speak and says, "The Eiffel Tower is in Paris." No one objects. The statement is true. The logic is sound. And yet something feels off. It has nothing to do with accuracy and everything to do with relevance. Philosophers and logicians have long grappled with how we determine what matters in a conversation or argument. Classical logic is concerned with truth, whether a conclusion follows from its premises. But truth alone isn't enough. You can string together perfect syllogisms and still end up saying nothing that matters. That's the core of the problem of relevance. In formal systems, a conclusion is valid if it logically follows, even if it has nothing to do with the topic at hand. You could argue, all cats are animals. Paris is in France. Therefore, the sun is hot. Each sentence is true, but the conclusion feels detached, irrelevant, almost absurd. This gap between logic and meaning opens a troubling possibility that rational discourse can remain technically correct while drifting far from anything meaningful. Some philosophers have tried to fix this with relevance logic, a system that demands premises be connected to the conclusion in more than just form. But defining relevance precisely turns out to be harder than expected. What counts as related? How do we measure meaningfulness? In ordinary life, we rely on shared assumptions, context, social norms. We feel what's relevant, but that feeling isn't built into logic. It's something else, vaguer, more human, shaped by attention and purpose. This leaves a haunting tension. We may think we're reasoning well when we're simply stringing facts together without weight. We may speak truth and still say nothing of use. So when someone answers a question or offers an explanation, ask yourself, does it connect or just pretend to? Because in the quiet spaces between what is said and what is meant, relevance is the invisible thread that makes understanding possible. Speech Act Pluralism. You walk into a room and say, "I promise." That's not just a sentence. It's an act. Something in the world has changed just because you said it. Language doesn't only describe reality. Sometimes it creates it. This is the heart of speech act theory. And speech act pluralism goes even further. It suggests that every utterance may perform multiple acts at once, declaring, requesting, warning, revealing, inviting, all woven into a single moment of speech. You don't just say things, you do things through saying them. Take the words, "It's cold in here." Depending on how you say it and who hears it, it could be a simple observation or a request to close the window, or a complaint, or an invitation to come closer. One phrase, many acts. Speech Act Pluralism tells us meaning isn't fixed inside words. It emerges from the blend of intention, context, tone, relationship, and timing. The speaker and the listener co-create what is really happening. This challenges the idea that meaning is stable, objective, or singular. Even the most carefully chosen words can fracture into layers of interpretation the moment they leave your lips. And then there are moments when we don't even realize what we're doing. A casual sure might actually be a reluctant concession. A warm good to see you might hide a quiet ache. The surface never tells the whole story. In politics, in therapy, in love, words carry weight far beyond their dictionary definitions. They heal, harm, shift power, build trust, collapse it. We pretend that speech is about facts and logic, but it's often about action, social moves, invisible agreements, emotional wagers. To speak is never neutral. Every sentence is a choice, one that does something whether we intend it or not. So the next time you speak, pause. What are your words actually doing? Performativity and truth. You stand before a crowd and say, "I now pronounce you married." You don't describe a fact. You make one. Before the words, the couple was unmarried. After them, they're bound by law, by ritual, by meaning. The words didn't report reality. They created it. This is the strange power of performativity. Philosopher J.L. Austin first pointed it out. Not all utterances describe, some perform, but Judith Butler and others took it further, arguing that entire identities, norms, and truths are shaped through repeated speech acts. You're not just born into a world, you're spoken into it, again and again. A child is told, "You're a boy," or "You're a girl." That phrase isn't just informative, it's formative. The words help build a life, a set of expectations, a way of moving, dressing, being seen. The repetition of these performatives doesn't just reflect truth, it installs it. Even the truth of a courtroom depends on language. Guilty, not guilty. A phrase uttered by the right voice, in the right space, carries the weight of justice. What was ambiguous becomes settled, not by proof alone, but by pronouncement. So where does that leave us? If truth can be performed, then truth isn't just out there waiting to be found. It can also be built through language, repetition, authority, and shared belief. The act of speaking, when backed by social power, can solidify reality. This doesn't mean truth is fiction. It means truth is complicated. Some truths are discovered, others are constructed, reinforced, inherited. You live in a web of performatives. From rituals to roles, declarations to diagnoses, the world tells you what is, and you speak it back again and again until it feels immovable. But maybe it's not. Because if words can build realities, maybe they can also undo them. Situated knowledge. You're standing on a balcony in a city you've never visited before. The air smells unfamiliar. The streets stretch in patterns you don't yet understand. A local stands beside you, pointing to a market, a school, a monument. To you, it's all new. To them, it's home. You're looking at the same scene, but you're not seeing the same thing. This is the heart of situated knowledge. The idea that all knowing is shaped by where you are, who you are, and how you've lived. There's no universal detached perspective that sees everything as it truly is. Every viewpoint comes from somewhere. A body, a culture, a moment in time. Even the most objective claims are filtered through human eyes, histories, and hierarchies. Philosopher Donna Haraway calls the fantasy of a view from nowhere a myth, one that hides power behind the illusion of neutrality. The scientist in the lab, the historian in the archive, the philosopher in the armchair. Each is speaking not from above the world, but from within it. And that changes everything. Because when you recognize knowledge as situated, you stop asking, is it true for everyone, and start asking, who is this true for? Who gets to know? Who gets to speak? This doesn't mean truth is relative. It means it's layered, partial, lived. The closer you get to the ground, the more you realize every truth you hold is shaped by the soil beneath your feet. This changes how you listen. It means the person who grew up in war might understand peace in a way no textbook ever could. The one who's been silenced might sense power in places others miss. Knowing isn't just thinking, it's surviving, enduring, witnessing. You can't escape your location, but you can learn to see it, to question it, to place it next to others, and slowly build a truth more honest than the illusion of objectivity ever allowed. Because sometimes, the most important part of what you know is where you're standing when you know it. Tacit knowledge paradox. You tie your shoes without thinking. You ride a bicycle after years away. Your hands move, your balance adjusts, your muscles respond, and yet if someone asked you to write down how you do it, step by step, you'd struggle. You know how, but you don't know how you know. This is the tacit knowledge paradox, the mystery of the knowledge that lives beneath language, the things you can do, the instincts you trust, the understandings that guide your life, even though you've never quite put them into words. Philosopher Michael Polanyi put it simply, we know more than we can tell. Think of how a pianist plays. Each note is precise, each motion rehearsed, but the awareness isn't entirely conscious. The fingers know, the body remembers. Or a craftsman shaping wood, not calculating angles or force with a formula, just feeling it, responding to grain and tension. Try to explain it, and it slips through. Tacit knowledge isn't just in the body. It's in the mind, too. You recognize sarcasm in someone's tone. You understand a friend's silence. You spot a lie not through facts, but through something in the pause, the glance, the energy. It's not taught in school. You picked it up living. And yet, in a world obsessed with data and definitions, tacit knowledge is treated like a ghost, present but unspeakable. This paradox haunts philosophy and science. How do we study what we can't articulate? How do we teach what can't be said? In AI, in medicine, in ethics, so much depends on patterns we can't formalize. Expertise often hides in the spaces between explanation. You try to speak it, and it disappears. Tacit knowledge reminds you that wisdom isn't always found in words, that depth doesn't always come from clarity, and that some of the most essential parts of being human, trust, intuition, creativity, live in silence, not speech. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the deepest truths are the ones you carry in your body, not your mouth. Folk psychology versus scientific image. You feel angry. You think, she made me mad. You remember what she said, replay it, assign meaning. You say, I believe she did it on purpose. And just like that, you've built a story, a map of your inner life. This map is called folk psychology. It's how you navigate yourself and others, beliefs, desires, intentions. We speak in terms of motives. We assume people act because of reasons. He went to the fridge because he wanted juice. She left the party because she felt ignored. It all seems obvious, familiar, human. But then science arrives. Neuroscience opens the brain and finds no beliefs, no intentions, just patterns of activity. Psychology models behavior with variables and reward functions. Evolutionary theory strips motives down to instincts and survival strategies. In this scientific image, minds aren't storytelling agents. They're systems, machines, biochemical puppets. So which one is true? The story you tell yourself that you're sad because your partner forgot your birthday, or the scan that shows changes in serotonin and dopamine, regardless of the date. The philosopher Wilfrid Sellars called this the conflict between the manifest image and the scientific image. The manifest image is your lived experience, warm, first person, full of meaning. The scientific image is cold, detached, empirical. But they don't always agree. And the tension is more than philosophical. If free will is an illusion, are promises real? If love is a neurotransmitter spike, why does heartbreak feel like the end of the world? Your day-to-day mind is built from folk psychology. But underneath it, science whispers a different story. You live in both worlds. You explain your actions through reasons, but your biology just fires. You believe you're rational, but your neurons pull the strings. You feel like a self, but maybe you're just a sum of processes too complex to see. And still, you say, I love you. And it means everything. Radical interpretation. Imagine waking up in a place where no one speaks your language. Not a word, not a gesture, nothing familiar. You watch their faces, their movements, their rituals. A man raises his hand when others speak. A woman steps back before entering a room. What do they mean? You begin to interpret, to guess, to assign intent. This is the world of radical interpretation, a concept introduced by philosopher Donald Davidson. It asks, how do we ever understand others in the first place, especially when we don't share language, culture, or context? According to Davidson, interpretation doesn't start with definitions. It starts with charity. You assume the other person is rational, that their words aim at truth, that their behaviors aren't random. You work backward from what must be meaningful. You don't just decode language, you construct it. Every act of understanding, even in your own language, is a leap of faith. When your friend says, I'm fine, you know not to take it literally. When a child says the moon is following them, you don't correct them, you intuit what they mean. Meaning isn't in the words. It's in the pattern, the context, the person. And that's what makes it radical. Because if interpretation is always an act of guesswork, even between people who share a language, then truth itself becomes slippery. Every conversation is built on assumptions. Every understanding is provisional. You never fully inhabit another mind. You just get close enough to believe you did. And yet, that closeness is powerful. It means that knowledge doesn't live in isolation. It emerges in relationship. You understand others not by mirroring them, but by leaning into their difference, listening not just for agreement, but for coherence. In a way, all meaning is translated, all language is metaphor, and all minds are foreign countries we visit without ever fully arriving. But even if you never reach the center, you can still stand at the border, quietly nodding as they speak. Argumentative virtue. You're in a debate and you feel it coming, the rise of heat in your chest, the tightening behind your eyes, the need to win. You prepare your next point, not to understand, but to strike. You stop listening. You sharpen. You fire. And even if you're right, something's lost. This is where argumentative virtue enters. A philosophy not about what you argue, but how. It's not logic alone that makes a mind wise. It's how that logic is wielded, with humility, with generosity, with the courage to slow down when speed is seductive. In ancient rhetoric, virtue wasn't just moral, it was practical. Arete, the excellence of doing something well. In argument, excellence isn't scoring points, it's holding space for tension, it's recognizing when you're speaking to be understood, and when you're speaking to overpower. True argumentative virtue means asking yourself, what is my aim? If it's truth, then you must be open to being wrong. If it's clarity, then you must speak so others can hear, not just so they admire your brilliance. If it's wisdom, then you must engage in good faith, even when others don't. This virtue is rare, because arguing well is exhausting. It requires restraint when it's easier to interrupt. It demands nuance in a world that rewards outrage, and it often means walking away with fewer certainties than you arrived with. But when practiced, it changes you. You begin to listen differently. You ask better questions. You resist the urge to simplify what's complex. You stop needing to win. and something quieter takes its place, a respect for the slow unfolding of understanding, the sacred ground between minds. It's not that you give up your beliefs. It's that you hold them like tools, not weapons. And sometimes, the most virtuous thing you can say is, I see where you're coming from. Inferentialism. You say, it's raining. A simple sentence. But what does it mean? Is it just a description of weather or something deeper? A signal, a gesture, a hinge in a web of other thoughts. According to inferentialism, meaning doesn't come from what words point to. It comes from the role they play in reasoning. Inference, not reference. The value of "it's raining" lies in what follows. Take an umbrella. Cancel the hike. The streets will flood. Words are tools, not labels. The philosopher Robert Brandom popularized this view, arguing that language is like a chessboard. Each word is a piece whose meaning comes from how it moves, what justifies it, what consequences it permits. Dog doesn't mean a furry creature. It means something you can infer from. It barks. It needs food. It isn't a cat. This reshapes how we think about understanding. To grasp a word isn't to hold its definition in your mind. It's to know how it fits in a larger pattern of thought. And the more you understand those patterns, the more fluent you become, not just in speech, but in thought itself. Meaning, then, is social. We don't just express beliefs. We navigate them together. You say something, and I respond, not just to the sentence, but to the network of claims it activates. Every conversation is a dance of permission and obligation. What follows from what? What supports what? What contradicts what? This is inferentialism's radical core, that thinking itself is a kind of dialogue. Even alone, you reason as if someone's listening. You test claims, follow consequences, justify leaps. Language shapes logic, not the other way around. And understanding a concept means knowing what it allows you to do in the game of reasoning. You don't merely see words, you feel their gravity, how they pull ideas into orbit, how they push thoughts away. And every time you speak, you're not just saying something. You're making a move. Knowledge by acquaintance versus description. Close your eyes and think of the moon, not a fact about it, just the image. Cold, luminous, distant, yet hauntingly familiar. You know it, somehow. You've seen it. That's knowledge by acquaintance. Now imagine hearing about a person you've never met. You know her name, her profession, where she studied. You can repeat those facts, but you've never looked into her eyes. You don't know how her voice rises when she laughs, or how she leans in when she cares. That's knowledge by description. Philosopher Bertrand Russell drew a sharp line between these two. Acquaintance is direct, unmediated experience, raw knowing. Description is mediated, indirect, structured through language, inference, and abstraction. And while both count as knowledge, they don't feel the same. Knowing about pain is different from being in it. You can read 100 books about grief and still not know what it does to a person's sleep or the color of silence it leaves behind. You can know every anatomical detail of music perception and still be unprepared when a song breaks you open. The problem is, our world favors description. We're flooded with facts, summaries, labels, but we often mistake this surface familiarity for depth. We say we know someone because we follow them online. We say we understand a concept because we can define it, but there's a gap, a hidden distance between information and intimacy. And it matters. Because some truths only reveal themselves up close. You can describe love endlessly, but until it rearranges you from the inside, you don't really know it. You can describe a landscape, but until your feet sink into its soil, it's just a map. Acquaintance is fragile. You lose it when you turn away. Description persists. But one pierces, the other circles. And in the end, the most profound things in life, beauty, suffering, wonder, can't be fully described. They must be encountered. Defeasible reasoning. You believe the bridge will hold. You've walked it before. Others are crossing now. The wood seems sturdy, but deep down you know you could be wrong. That's the quiet tension inside defeasible reasoning, a way of thinking built not on certainty but on possibility. Reasoning that holds, unless something overturns it. In contrast to deductive logic, where conclusions are guaranteed if the premises are true, defeasible reasoning accepts that knowledge lives in a changing world. Your conclusions are provisional. They work for now. They stand until a new fact, a better argument, or a hidden flaw brings them down. It's the logic of real life. You trust your friend until you see a message that suggests betrayal. You believe the weather forecast until the sky turns black at noon. You assume the key is in your pocket until your hand comes up empty. In every case, your belief was reasonable, but its reasonableness didn't make it immune. Philosophers and AI theorists alike have explored how human minds and intelligent systems need this flexibility to navigate uncertainty. We live with incomplete data, evolving contexts, and limited time. To demand perfect certainty before acting is to freeze. To never revise our beliefs is to shatter. Defeasible reasoning lets us move with the world, not despite it. It also humbles us, because when you accept that your conclusions are defeasible, you let go of the illusion that being wrong means being foolish. Instead, it means you're alive, open, responsive. But there's a cost. This kind of reasoning requires constant vigilance. You must be willing to revise what you know, to carry beliefs lightly, yet seriously, to pause and ask, what would change my mind, and then actually change it, if the evidence demands. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. And in a world where people cling to certainty like armor, there's something quietly radical about saying, this is what I believe for now. Intellectual humility. You hear an argument that contradicts everything you believe, not just a fact, but a way of seeing the world. It doesn't fit. It feels wrong, almost offensive. And in that moment, you have a choice. You can dismiss it, label it ignorant, biased, absurd, or you can pause, not because it's right, but because you might not be entirely right either. That pause is the beginning of intellectual humility. It's not self-doubt, it's not weakness, it's the quiet strength of knowing that your mind is a lens, not a mirror, that your beliefs are scaffolds useful, but always incomplete. Philosopher Jason Baer describes intellectual humility as the recognition that your cognitive limitations are real. No one escapes them, not the smartest person you know, not the one who sounds most confident, not even you. But we're taught to hide that, to sound sure, to speak as if every opinion is a conclusion. And in that performance, we lose something rare, the ability to learn. Because humility is the only space where transformation can happen. It lets you ask, what am I missing? Not with shame, but with curiosity. It invites disagreement, not as a threat, but as a chance to sharpen your edges. It allows complexity to breathe. And it reframes being wrong. You weren't defeated, you were refined. Intellectual humility is also protective. In a world full of misinformation, outrage, and algorithmic certainty, it's the trait that slows you down. That helps you ask, how do I know this? Or why do I trust this source? It shields you from the arrogance of always being sure and the danger of only listening to what confirms what you already think. It doesn't mean you never believe in anything. It means your beliefs have doors, not walls. And the moment you believe you're immune to error, that's when it finds you. Epistemic bubbles versus echo chambers. You scroll through your feed. Every post, every video, every comment, all of it agrees with you. It feels comforting, familiar, like the world makes sense, like you're right. But what if that comfort is a trap? You may be inside an epistemic bubble, a social or informational space where contrary voices simply don't appear. Not because they're censored, just because they're filtered out. You never followed them. The algorithm never served them. They've been quietly edited from your mental landscape. And without opposing views, your beliefs begin to harden. Not because they've been tested, but because they haven't. Now imagine something deeper. Not just a lack of exposure, but active distrust of the other side. A place where even if a dissenting voice breaks through, it's dismissed before it's heard. Where disagreement isn't seen as a challenge, but as a betrayal. That's an echo chamber. The philosopher Thi Nguyen draws this distinction clearly. Epistemic bubbles isolate you. Echo chambers train you to disbelieve everything outside them. One is passive, the other is active, and both can reshape how truth feels. Inside a bubble, you might genuinely believe there's no real opposition, just noise. Inside a chamber, you come to see outsiders not just as wrong, but as dangerous, untrustworthy, manipulative. And so your circle closes, tighter and tighter. The danger isn't just polarization, it's epistemic loneliness, a reality so curated, so rehearsed, that the very idea of being wrong begins to fade from possibility, and when that happens, growth stops. So how do you break out? You don't need to agree with everyone, but you do need to hear them. You need friction, discomfort, the humility to entertain a thought you'd rather reject, because truth isn't always where it's loudest. Sometimes it hides in what we silence. The scariest echo isn't the one that repeats, it's the one that replaces. Post-truth epistemology. You hear someone say, facts don't matter. People believe what they want. At first, it sounds like cynicism. But what if it's something deeper? What if we've entered a world where truth itself has lost its authority, not because it vanished, but because it's been dethroned? This is the heart of post-truth epistemology, a philosophical reflection on what happens when truth is no longer the central currency of belief. In a post-truth environment, the traditional idea of knowledge justified true belief begins to unravel. It's not that people don't care about being right. It's that rightness becomes subjective. Facts become feelings. Evidence becomes affiliation. What's true becomes indistinguishable from what fits my story. But how did we get here? Some philosophers argue it's not a recent collapse, but a slow erosion, a consequence of fractured media, algorithmic filters, and a rising mistrust in authority. Others trace it further to Nietzsche's declaration that there are no facts, only interpretations, to Foucault's idea that truth is tied to power, to the deep postmodern suspicion that objectivity is just a narrative in disguise. And now, that suspicion has gone mainstream. Post-truth isn't the absence of truth, it's the multiplication of competing truths, each wrapped in identity, loyalty, and fear. You no longer ask, what happened? You ask, whose version do I trust? This doesn't mean we're doomed, but it does mean the way we argue, persuade, and believe must evolve. Because in a post-truth world, logic alone can't reach someone. You have to understand the frame they live in, the emotional scaffolding that holds their world together. You have to speak not just to the mind, but to the meaning behind the mind. And maybe that's the challenge of our time, not just to find truth, but to make it visible again. Not as a weapon, but as a shared horizon. Something you walk toward, even if you're coming from opposite directions. The problem of theoretical terms. You hear the word electron, and a picture forms tiny particles whirling around a nucleus. But that image isn't real. It's a metaphor, a placeholder, a shadow on the wall of something we don't fully see. And that's the problem. In the philosophy of science, theoretical terms, words like quark, gravity, or dark matter, don't point to things we can observe directly. They refer to the unseen machinery behind phenomena, concepts that exist not in front of our eyes, but within the scaffolding of our theories. But if we can't observe these entities, how do we know what we're even talking about? This is known as the problem of theoretical terms, a puzzle that asks whether scientific language genuinely refers to real things or merely serves as a tool for predicting what we'll see. Imagine this. Two scientific theories describe the same observable events perfectly, but they use entirely different terms and explanations. One says there's a field, the other, a force. Both match the data. Which one is true? This is where realism and instrumentalism clash. Scientific realists argue that theoretical terms aim to describe what really exists, whether or not we can touch or see it. Instrumentalists counter that these terms are useful fictions. They work, but they might not reflect reality at all. And then there's semantic skepticism. What if some theoretical terms don't refer to anything at all? What if they're linguistic scaffolding, mental constructs that help us model but not understand? This isn't just a scientific issue. It haunts every attempt to explain the invisible: consciousness, time, meaning. Are we discovering truth or inventing vocabulary that lets us pretend we did? You can measure the ripple of a thing, but can you ever be sure there was something beneath the surface to cause it? Maybe knowledge isn't about finding the right words. Maybe it's about noticing which ones vanish when we try to grasp them too tightly. The puzzle of learning from fiction. You sit down with a novel. None of it is real. No dates, no places, no verifiable facts. The characters never existed. The world never happened. And yet, you close the book, changed. Somehow, you've learned something. But how? This is the strange puzzle at the heart of learning from fiction. If the stories aren't true, if their claims aren't grounded in fact, then what exactly are you learning when you come away with new insights, new empathy, or a clearer grasp of reality? Philosophers have long wrestled with this paradox. Because if fiction is false, and knowledge requires truth, then reading fiction shouldn't teach us anything. And yet it does, sometimes more powerfully than truth ever could. Maybe it's because fiction doesn't just state, it simulates. A well-told story doesn't tell you what suffering is. It walks you through it. It doesn't argue for justice. It lets you feel injustice in your bones. Fiction activates something deeper than intellect. It lets you rehearse emotions, confront dilemmas, and inhabit perspectives you'd never encounter otherwise. You don't just learn about grief, you feel what it does to someone's voice when they're holding it in. Still, the mystery remains. What kind of knowledge is this? Some say it's emotional knowledge. Others call it moral insight or conceptual expansion. But maybe it's something older, something stories have done for as long as humans have spoken in circles around fire. They don't just transfer facts, they shape how we see. And maybe the reason fiction teaches us so much is because the line between fiction and reality is thinner than we think. Every belief is, in some way, a story. Every identity, a role we perform. Every worldview, a narrative we inherit. So when a fictional world teaches us something true, it's not a contradiction. It's a reminder. Truth doesn't always need to be factual to be real. Quiet hope theory. You don't announce it. You don't shout it. You carry it like a secret, even from yourself. A silent belief that things could somehow still turn out all right, even when you don't know how. Even when everything around you says they won't. This is quiet hope, not the loud, blazing kind that fuels revolutions or chants in crowds. It's the soft kind, the unnoticed flicker that survives the storm. Philosopher Jonathan Lear once asked, "What does it mean to hope after everything familiar has collapsed? After identity, culture, even meaning itself has been hollowed out?" Quiet hope lives there. It isn't built on certainty. In fact, it thrives in uncertainty. It's not a strategy. It's not even optimism. It's the simple refusal to let despair be the last word. But here's the strange thing. This kind of hope can be more powerful than certainty ever was, because it doesn't depend on a clear path forward. It doesn't need guarantees. It exists for its own sake. You've seen this hope in someone who keeps showing up, even when no one thanks them. You've felt it when you chose to care again, after being hurt. It's the quiet decision to plant a seed you might never see bloom. Philosophers call it quiet, not because it's weak, but because it resists the demand to be proven. It's a rebellion against the need for justification. A kind of faith that's smaller than religion, but deeper than logic. In a world obsessed with results, quiet hope values the act of hoping itself. And maybe that's its strength. It doesn't try to conquer the future. It simply refuses to let the present close in. It's not the belief that everything will be okay. It's the belief that something still matters, even if nothing is okay. And when all else has been stripped away, your name, your plans, your past, that quiet hope might be the only thing left that still feels like you. Temporal asymmetry in moral judgment. Imagine this: a man poisons his friend's drink, but before the poison takes effect, he regrets it, swaps the glasses, and no harm is done. Now picture another man who accidentally poisons his friend's drink, unaware of the danger. The friend drinks it and dies. Two cases. One intent but no harm. One harm but no intent. Which feels worse? If you're like most people, the second case, the one with the death, hits harder, even though the intent was absent, even though the act was technically more innocent. This is temporal asymmetry in moral judgment, the strange tendency of our minds to weigh outcomes more heavily than intentions after the fact, and intentions more heavily before. We want morality to be fair, consistent, rational, but our judgments seem to tilt with time's direction. Before something happens, we focus on what a person meant. After it happens, we focus on what they caused, and that shift, almost invisible, is enough to warp justice. Think of it like moral gravity. Time bends how we assign blame and praise. A failed attempt at kindness may be forgotten. A well-meaning disaster may be condemned. And what's worse, we rarely notice this tilt. It sneaks into courtrooms, into apologies, into our own inner narratives. "I didn't mean to" sounds different when spoken before or after the consequences have arrived. Philosophers wrestle with this asymmetry. Should morality care more about inner motive or outer effect? Can we even separate the two? And beneath it all, there's a deeper discomfort. If time shapes morality, then our judgments may not be timeless truths. They may be shadows cast by direction, by hindsight, by the irreversible unfolding of events. You look back and find guilt. You look forward and find mercy. But morality, it seems, never stands still. Non-ideal theory in ethics. Picture a perfectly just society. No oppression, no exploitation, no inequality. Every person respects every other, and no one is ever left behind. Now open your eyes, because that isn't where we live. Ethics has long been obsessed with ideals, abstract models of how things ought to be. These theories are elegant, symmetrical, sometimes even beautiful, but there's a problem. We don't live in a clean world. We live in a cracked one. Non-ideal theory steps into that mess. Instead of asking, "What's the perfect system?" it asks, "What can we do when the system is broken?" It shifts the focus from utopia to triage, from what's theoretically best to what's realistically possible. Philosopher Charles Mills argued that traditional ethics often ignores injustice, not because it doesn't care, but because it starts too far above the ground. If your moral blueprint assumes a level playing field, then your rules will fail those who are already buried under it. Non-ideal theory faces harder questions. How do you act morally when every option is compromised? When doing good for one group might hurt another? When survival demands moral compromise? It's not interested in moral perfection. It's interested in moral repair. That might mean building justice slowly, in the gaps of a corrupt system. It might mean choosing the least harmful path, not the ideal one. It might mean recognizing when the best option isn't good enough and doing it anyway. This shift isn't cynical. It's compassionate, because it sees people not as abstract agents, but as fragile bodies in a flawed world. It accepts that some damage has already been done, and that ethics must live among the wreckage, not above it. Ideal theory tells us what to hope for. Non-ideal theory tells us what to do next. And in the distance between the two is where most of life unfolds. Supererogation and moral saints. You see someone leap into icy water to save a drowning child, a stranger, no reward, no hesitation. They risk everything and succeed. You call them a hero, and rightly so. But what if they hadn't jumped? Would they be evil? Probably not. Most people would say they weren't obligated. It would have been admirable, but not required. That's the strange space of supererogation, moral acts that go beyond duty. They're not expected, they're not owed, but when someone does them, we stand in awe. Philosophers have long wrestled with this idea. If morality is supposed to guide our behavior, shouldn't it be clear what's required and what's optional? And if an action is so clearly good, why isn't everyone obligated to do it? Supererogation messes with tidy moral systems. It suggests that some acts are so noble, so costly, so rare, that morality rewards them, but doesn't demand them. And then comes the next question. Should we all aspire to be moral saints? Susan Wolf argues no. In her famous essay, she paints the picture of someone who always does what's morally best, never selfish, never petty, never resting while others suffer. The perfect moral being, and it's exhausting. You wouldn't want to be their friend. You wouldn't want to be them. Wolf suggests that morality isn't the only dimension of life. We value art, humor, love, personal quirks. A life of pure moral sainthood might be admirable, but it might not be fully human. Supererogation reminds us that goodness can live outside obligation, that greatness often arrives uninvited, that moral beauty doesn't need a rule book. You don't owe the world your life, but sometimes someone gives it anyway. And that's where awe begins. Practical identity theory. You're a student, a parent, a musician, a caregiver, a friend. Each of these roles carries expectations. Each one tells you how to act, what to value, who to be. But what happens when one of those roles fades? When you lose the job, when the relationship ends, when the audience stops listening? Who are you then? Practical identity theory suggests that our sense of self is not something we find, but something we build through the commitments and identities we live out in practice. It isn't a hidden core waiting to be discovered. It's a shifting web of roles and obligations we inhabit over time. Christine Korsgaard, one of the key thinkers behind this idea, argues that to act at all, we must see ourselves as something: a teacher, a citizen, a protector. It's these roles that give shape to our reasons for acting. They give our choices meaning. But identity is fragile. If your practical identities collapse, if the roles you relied on no longer fit, you can find yourself in a strange, silent place. Not just lost, but hollow, as if the scaffolding of self has disappeared. This theory challenges the romantic idea of a pure, independent self. It says, there is no you without your roles. You are what you stand for, what you commit to, what you live through. That can be empowering. It means you can reinvent yourself, not by looking inward, but by choosing new identities to inhabit. It means change is not betrayal, it's survival. But it can also be terrifying, because if your identities dissolve, so might your reason to act. The self isn't behind your actions, it is your actions. You are what you do, again and again, until the story makes sense. And if that story falters, so do you. Reflective endorsement. You make a decision, one you thought was right. Years later, you look back. Maybe it was naive. Maybe it hurt someone. Maybe it no longer fits who you are. But you don't just regret it. You feel disconnected from the person who made it, as if some stranger wearing your face once held the steering wheel. Reflective endorsement is the idea that for a value, a desire, or a reason to truly be yours, it must survive reflection. It's not enough to want something in the moment. You must be able to look at that desire, examine it, question it, and still say, yes, I stand by this. Christine Korsgaard, again, helped popularize this idea in moral philosophy. For her, human agency isn't just about acting. It's about owning your actions, being able to justify them not only to others, but to yourself. And that self, it's not some static entity. It's a continuous act of endorsement, a layered structure of what you've approved, rejected, and revised over time. Without reflection, our desires rule us. But with reflection, we face a different challenge: endless questioning. Some people never stop reevaluating, caught in a spiral of doubt. Others endorse too quickly, mistaking convenience for authenticity. So, what makes something truly you? Not the feeling in the moment, not the impulse, but your ability to look at it with clear eyes, knowing what it means, what it costs, what it says about who you are, and still say yes. Reflection is not just memory, it's authorship. And through it, you write the only story that counts, the one you can live with. Future-oriented agency. Picture yourself 5 years from now. Maybe you're healthier, wiser, free from the distractions that haunt you today. That version of you feels distant, imagined even, but strangely, it's already shaping what you do. You go to sleep early instead of doom scrolling. You choose the book over the shortcut. You pause, and in that pause, something unusual happens. The future reaches back. Future-oriented agency is the idea that we don't just act for who we are, we act for who we're becoming. And sometimes we borrow willpower from that imagined version of ourselves. Psychologists call this episodic future thinking, the ability to simulate possible selves. Philosophers take it further. They ask, what gives your present life structure, if not the scaffolding of imagined futures? Without a vision of who we could be, decisions lose meaning. You can't sacrifice for something unless you can picture it, but that imagined self is a fiction, a hope dressed in realism. It doesn't exist. Not yet. So what drives us? Hope or delusion? Some philosophers warn that living too much in the future can hollow out the present, that the self becomes a project we never finish. But others argue it's precisely this unfinishedness that defines us. To be human is to be incomplete, to be in motion. The future self isn't a destination. It's a compass. It pulls you forward, even when you stumble, and when the days feel empty, when progress disappears, it whispers back, I'm still possible. Your agency doesn't just live in your hands, it lives in your horizon. The ethics of attention. You're scrolling, again, not because you chose to, but because something chose for you. The flashing thumbnail, the headline, the ping of a notification. You didn't give your attention, it was taken. But what if your attention isn't just a resource? What if it's a moral act? That's the claim behind the ethics of attention. The idea that where we direct our awareness isn't neutral, it reflects what we value, and it shapes who we become. Think about it. When you give someone your full attention, you're not just observing them, you're recognizing them. You're affirming that they matter. And in a world of noise, that's powerful. Simone Weil once wrote, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. It's not about effort. It's about presence. And presence is costly, especially now. Modern life is an economy of distraction. Algorithms are trained to predict not just what you want, but what will interrupt you. They thrive on split focus, on fractured thinking, on stolen seconds. But philosophers argue stolen attention is stolen agency. If you can't control what you notice, you can't control what you care about. And if you can't control what you care about, your values aren't really yours. This isn't just about screen time. It's about moral weight, choosing to attend to a person in pain, choosing to linger on a difficult truth, choosing not to look away. Because in every moment you're saying, this is what matters. And often silence isn't indifference, it's attention directed elsewhere. So the question becomes, who or what decides what you see? Is it you, or something whispering just below awareness, steering your gaze without asking? Attention is the first step in every decision, and maybe, in the end, it's the most ethical one. Unstable value hierarchies. Imagine a person who believes in honesty, loyalty, and justice. But what happens when those values collide? When being loyal means hiding the truth, when justice demands betrayal, suddenly virtue becomes a trap. This is the tension at the heart of unstable value hierarchies, the idea that our values aren't arranged in a perfect, unchanging order. They shift, they overlap, and sometimes they contradict each other in ways that force impossible choices. We like to believe that values are like a ladder. Honesty above politeness, family above strangers, survival above comfort. But real life doesn't work like that. Our value systems are more like tangled webs than linear hierarchies. And when those webs tear, we feel it in the gut. Do you stay true to a friend or speak out against what they did? Do you protect your peace or engage in a fight that needs to be fought? Each decision pulls against something else you care about. No matter what you choose, something sacred gets cut. Philosophers and psychologists alike warn us, when our values become unstable, we don't just feel uncertain, we feel fractured, as if part of us is betraying another part. We might start rationalizing decisions instead of reflecting on them. We might silence one value entirely, just to avoid the discomfort, or worse, we might adopt rigid ideologies that promise perfect clarity, no matter how brutal the trade-offs. And in that fracture, something dangerous can grow. But the truth is, real ethics isn't clean. It's messy. It asks you to hold contradictions without collapsing. To admit, I don't know which value matters more right now, but I still have to choose. The goal isn't to eliminate tension. It's to navigate it without losing your core. Because your values aren't just what you claim. They're what you protect when everything can't be saved. The problem of moral demandingness. You pass by a stranger drowning in a shallow pond. You're wearing new shoes, but you don't hesitate. You jump in. The shoes are ruined, but the person lives. Easy call, right? Now imagine a child dying across the world. You could save them too. All it takes is the price of those same shoes, sent to the right charity. But this time you don't act. Why? This is where the problem of moral demandingness begins. If morality means doing the most good you can, then shouldn't every spare dollar, every spare hour, go toward saving lives? Isn't anything less a moral failure? But that standard is crushing. Some ethical theories, especially utilitarianism, suggest that if you can help, you must always, and not just a little, not just once, continuously, until you've sacrificed almost everything, your comforts, your hobbies, even your dreams. And if you don't, you're morally in the wrong. But that idea triggers something deep and defensive, not because we're selfish necessarily, but because it feels inhuman, like we're being asked to become machines of pure altruism, running on guilt. So philosophers have debated how much morality is too much. Some say ethics must be practical. It has to fit within the limits of human psychology. If the moral bar is too high, people will stop trying altogether. Others argue that truth doesn't bend to comfort. Just because a duty is hard doesn't mean it disappears. But maybe the real discomfort isn't the demand. It's the mirror. The closer we get to realizing how much we could do, the more we have to face how much we don't. And that tension between the hero we might be and the person we are sits at the heart of every moral life. Maybe the point isn't to erase the burden. It's to carry it, imperfectly, with open eyes. The problem of alien norms. A traveler walks into a village far from home. The customs are unfamiliar, the values inverted. What they praise, he finds repellent. What they condemn, he considers noble. He listens, he learns, and yet a question begins to burn. Are they wrong, or am I? This is the heart of the problem of alien norms, the unsettling realization that what you hold sacred may not be universal. It may not even be understood outside your own cultural lens. Imagine growing up believing honesty is the highest virtue. Then you meet a culture that prizes harmony above truth. In their world, a lie that preserves peace is not a betrayal. It's wisdom. Now you're no longer confronting mere disagreement. You're facing a different moral reality. Anthropologists have seen this everywhere, from rituals of grief to concepts of justice, purity, honor, and shame. Practices that seem monstrous to outsiders are, within their own moral systems, coherent, even compassionate. So what happens when moral worlds collide? Some argue for moral relativism, that right and wrong are bound by culture, with no objective standard above them. Others insist on universalism, that certain values transcend context, that some norms aren't just different, they're wrong. But this isn't just theory. In a globalized world, we constantly encounter values we don't recognize. And often, our first instinct is judgment. Yet alien norms force reflection. If your sense of good and evil was shaped by history, language, and geography, how sure are you that you're standing on moral bedrock? The danger, of course, is slipping into moral paralysis. If everything is just a matter of perspective, then who are we to protest injustice? But the equal danger lies in arrogance, assuming that what feels right must be right, for everyone, everywhere. Alien norms don't always teach agreement, but they demand humility. Sometimes it's not the clash that matters, but how you hold your convictions when you realize they're not the only ones. Thick concepts in ethics. Some words do more than describe the world, they judge it. When you call someone brave, you're not just stating a fact, you're admiring them. When you say cruel, you're condemning. These are what philosophers call thick ethical concepts, terms that blur the line between description and evaluation. They're not neutral like tall or wooden. They come loaded. Embedded in them is a way of seeing, feeling, responding. Honest, greedy, loyal, oppressive, each one carries both a lens and a verdict. And that dual nature makes them powerful, but also dangerous. Because when value and meaning are fused, you can't question one without threatening the other. If a culture praises honor, what exactly is being praised? A code? A feeling? A behavior? Or just a story people tell to justify violence? Thick concepts offer shortcuts. Instead of listing actions or consequences, you just say cowardly, and the moral gravity lands instantly. But the risk is in the shadows they cast. They can obscure nuance, flatten complexity, silence disagreement. They carry the illusion of clarity. Wittgenstein once warned that the meaning of a word is its use in the language. So what happens when the same word is used differently in two moral worlds? Is freedom the ability to act without restraint, or the power to fulfill one's higher purpose? Disagreements about ethics are often really disagreements about thick concepts. We argue over words because we're arguing over worlds. But if you peel them back, if you ask why a term feels righteous or repulsive, you begin to uncover the values hidden inside your own moral language. You realize that many of your convictions aren't conclusions. They're inheritances. And once you see that, you can no longer take your words for granted. They're not just labels, they're the architecture of your ethical imagination. Backward-looking responsibility. Sometimes, the past doesn't stay behind you. It stares back, silently demanding explanation. Regret isn't just an emotion, it's a compass that spins backward, pointing to something left undone, unsaid, or unforgiven. Philosophers call this backward-looking responsibility, the idea that moral accountability isn't just about what you will do, but what you already did, or didn't do, or allowed to happen. We tend to treat ethics like a forward-facing project, choices, goals, progress. But guilt lives in the opposite direction. It asks, what kind of person were you? What action did you fail to take? Who suffered while you stayed silent? This form of responsibility is sticky. Even if time has passed, even if apologies were made, the act remains. And not just as a memory, sometimes it echoes through the consequences it set in motion. But the puzzle goes deeper. What if you didn't know better at the time? What if you've changed? What if your role was small, your power limited? Even then, backward-looking responsibility can cling to you, not as punishment, but as a haunting, because morality doesn't always follow clean lines. And the self you were yesterday can leave stains the self you are today doesn't know how to wash out. There's also collective memory. Families, cultures, and entire nations carry wounds of past wrongs. Colonialism, genocide, betrayal. And yet those who inherit the benefits may never have wielded the blade. Are they responsible? Or just lucky? Backward-looking responsibility challenges the idea that time redeems all things. It suggests that moral weight doesn't obey the clock. And it leaves you with a quiet dilemma. If the past still shapes the present, when does responsibility end? Group agency and collective blame. You're walking in a crowd, but something strange happens. The crowd starts moving with intent. Not chaos, not randomness. Coordination. Chants rise. Barriers fall. Windows shatter. And though your hands stayed at your sides, something inside you wonders, was I part of that? Philosophy calls this group agency, the idea that collectives can form intentions, take actions, and bear responsibility, not just as a sum of individuals, but as entities of their own. A company pollutes a river. A government enacts unjust laws. A mob turns violent. We say they did it, but who is they, and how do we assign blame? In moral philosophy, collective blame challenges the boundaries of the self. You may not have made the final call, but were you complicit? Were you silent when it mattered? Did your presence give power to something you didn't fully understand? Some argue that group agency is real in the same way a ship is real, made of parts, yet moving as one. Others say it's a convenient fiction, a way to dodge individual accountability by hiding in the fog of shared identity. But even if it's fiction, it's a powerful one. People will march under flags they didn't design, fight wars they didn't choose, uphold values they only half believe, because the pull of group belonging is ancient, tribal, primal. And when we act together, we create something beyond ourselves, something that can't apologize, but must be held accountable. So what happens when justice demands someone pay the price, and the group has no face? Sometimes the blame lingers in the air, never fully landing, like smoke after a fire no one claims to have lit. And yet it's there, in history, in silence, in the damage that remains when the group has disbanded. You step out of the crowd, but something follows. Emotion as epistemic access. You're standing at the edge of a field. The sun is setting, casting gold across the grass. And suddenly, for no clear reason, you feel a deep ache in your chest. A feeling of loss, of meaning slipping just out of reach. But there's no obvious reason to grieve. What if that feeling isn't just noise? What if it's a kind of knowledge? The idea that emotions are gateways to truth, epistemic access, suggests that certain feelings may reveal something about the world that logic alone cannot. When you feel shame, perhaps it's not just personal discomfort, perhaps it's a signal that you violated something sacred. When you feel awe, maybe it's your mind adjusting to something too vast to be broken down into categories. Emotions, in this view, aren't just reactions, they're instruments. Tools tuned to a dimension of reality that can't be measured, only felt. Some philosophers argue that moral truths, in particular, are best accessed through emotion. You don't calculate that cruelty is wrong. You feel it in your bones. You don't deduce the beauty of a moment. You're struck by it without consent. But emotion is volatile. It misfires. It overwhelms. It deceives. So the question becomes, which emotions are revealing something real, and which are merely echoing back your own inner distortions? This is the dilemma. If emotions can be sources of knowledge, then we must learn to read them with care, like ancient maps scrawled in symbols we only half understand. Dismissing them entirely leaves us blind. Trusting them too much leaves us lost. And sometimes, the most profound truths come disguised in moods we can't explain. Not because they're irrational, but because they belong to a kind of reason we haven't yet learned how to speak. Value realism versus constructivism. You're in a museum, staring at a painting. One person beside you whispers, "It's beautiful." Another scoffs, "It's meaningless." You don't argue, but deep down you wonder, is beauty something in the painting, or something we bring to it? Now ask the same of morality. Is goodness something real, out there, waiting to be discovered like a planet or a law of physics? Or is it something we invent, an agreement, a construction that only exists because we say it does? This is the tension between value realism and constructivism. Value realism says values like justice, kindness, or beauty exist independently of us. They're not up for vote. They don't bend to culture or consensus. Even if every human being thought cruelty was acceptable, it would still be wrong. Constructivism pushes back. It says values are built, forged through human experience, culture, negotiation. Morality isn't found, it's made, and that doesn't make it less meaningful. It makes it ours. But what happens when constructed values clash? If one culture builds a world on obedience and another on freedom, who's right? Without a deeper reality to appeal to, aren't all values equally valid or equally arbitrary? That's the fear realism tries to soothe, that without moral facts we're adrift in relativism. And yet, if values are real, where are they? How do we sense them? Are they woven into the universe like gravity, or do they shimmer just beyond the reach of science, tugging at our conscience, not our instruments? Some philosophers try to split the difference. Maybe there are truths, but we reach them through construction. That is, we build paths, but those paths aren't going anywhere unless something solid waits at the end. In the end, this debate touches something deeper than ethics or aesthetics. It's about whether meaning is something we uncover or something we create to survive. And sometimes, what matters most isn't whether a value is real or constructed, but whether you'd still believe in it if no one else did. Deep disagreement. You're speaking with someone, calmly, rationally. You present evidence, logic, empathy, but nothing moves them, not even slightly. And the strange part, they feel the same about you. Not that you're wrong, but that you don't even make sense. This is what philosophers call deep disagreement. Not just a clash of opinions, but a fracture in the very foundations of thought. The rules you rely on to judge what's reasonable, what counts as evidence, even what truth means, aren't shared. You're playing different games with different boards, but you both think it's chess. Most arguments assume common ground, that there's a shared language of reason, some mutual frame that makes persuasion possible. But deep disagreements challenge that idea. They reveal how fragile consensus really is. Imagine arguing with someone who doesn't believe in cause and effect, or someone who sees moral questions not as right or wrong, but as power plays. How do you convince them? What would count as proof? Some philosophers argue that deep disagreements can't be resolved by reason alone, that they expose the limits of rational discourse, that when two people's worldviews are built on entirely different scaffolding, trying to change one brick won't bring the walls down. Others say this is where philosophy begins, not ends. That deep disagreement forces us to ask, why do we believe what we believe? How did we come to trust logic, science, empathy, tradition? It's unsettling, because if someone else's worldview is coherent, deeply felt, and utterly alien, what makes you so sure yours is the correct one? Maybe deep disagreement isn't a failure to communicate. Maybe it's a mirror showing you the architecture of your own beliefs for the first time. Belief inertia. You come across a fact that contradicts something you've always believed. A study, a lived experience, a moment of doubt. For a second, it rattles you. But then, just as quickly, your mind seals itself shut, like a wound healing over too fast. The doubt is gone, and your belief remains. This is belief inertia, the tendency of your convictions to stay in motion even when the forces of logic, evidence or contradiction push against them. Like a boulder rolling downhill, some beliefs gain speed simply because they've been moving long enough. And stopping them requires more than just a better argument. It requires an emotional collision. Philosophers and psychologists have long wrestled with why we cling so tightly to what we believe. Is it comfort? Identity? Habit? The truth is, beliefs are rarely isolated thoughts. They're entangled with who we are, what groups we belong to, and what futures we allow ourselves to imagine. Changing one belief isn't just a correction, it's a small death. You've seen it. In politics, in religion, in science denial, in conspiracy theories. Even in your own past, belief inertia makes it hard to say, "I was wrong," because what follows might be, "Then who am I now?" But there's something deeper here. Inertia doesn't mean immobility. It just means that movement, once started, tends to continue in the same direction, unless acted on by a force. And sometimes that force isn't an argument or a statistic, it's a story, a moment, a crack in the world that's too haunting to ignore. The danger isn't in having beliefs, it's in forgetting that they're movable, that they formed once and could reform again, that the world changes. You change, and even the truest feeling can be a shadow cast by a belief that never stopped rolling. Transformative experience. You're offered a choice. Take the plunge, move to a new country, become a parent, step onto a stage for the first time. It's not just a big decision. It's one of those rare ones where you can't know what it will feel like until after you've done it. You don't know who you'll be on the other side. This is what philosopher L.A. Paul calls a transformative experience, a moment where you gain knowledge not by thinking, but by becoming. These experiences are strange because they break the model of rational choice. You can't predict their value. You can't weigh the pros and cons. Because the you who's doing the deciding doesn't yet understand the world the way the you after the decision will. Imagine tasting a fruit you've never had. No description can prepare you. Or falling in love for the first time, or losing someone who shaped your soul. These aren't just events. They shift the lens you use to view everything else. But here's the paradox. How do you choose something when the act of choosing changes what matters to you? You can't consult your future self. You can only guess at the contours of who you might become. And sometimes you have to choose with blind faith that the leap itself is the point. Philosophy often treats decision-making as clean and logical, but transformative experiences remind us that some choices must be made in the dark. You can't reason your way through becoming a parent, surviving a war, or confronting the sublime. You can only step forward and let the transformation carry you. And that brings us to a stranger question still. What if some choices aren't really made at all? What if sometimes we are acted through without ever choosing? Agency without intentionality. You reach for a door handle without thinking. Your mouth answers a question before your mind catches up. You nod in a conversation and only later wonder why. Sometimes you act not because you meant to, but because something inside you did. Something quieter, something older. This is the puzzle of agency without intentionality, the unsettling idea that not all action begins with a decision. Philosophers and cognitive scientists alike have questioned whether the self is the author of all its movements, or if the self is sometimes more like an editor, justifying what the body or brain already did. Think of muscle memory, or the automatic habits that form over years. You don't decide how to walk or how to flinch when something startles you, but it goes deeper than reflex. What about those moments when you speak with conviction, only to reflect and feel you don't fully agree with what you said, or when you sabotage yourself, delay your dreams, or gravitate toward pain, not because you want to, but because some unseen script is playing out? Agency is supposed to mean control, intention, will. But this theory fractures that illusion. It suggests that some of what we do emerges from layers of mind we can't access, unconscious patterns, buried emotions, social conditioning, and yet we still bear the consequences. We still wear the blame. We say, "I did that," even when we don't know why. Is the self a unified actor, or a chorus of impulses, some louder than others? If intentionality is just the spotlight we shine after something moves us, who or what is doing the moving? You begin to wonder, if not all your actions are intentional, how many of your thoughts are truly yours? And from there, the question deepens: not just who is acting, but how many of you are there? Plural selves theory. You act differently with your family than with your friends. You say things in private you'd never say in public. In some moments, you feel brave. In others, deeply unsure. It's not just mood, it's something more fundamental, a shifting of the self. Plural selves theory begins with a provocative idea that the self is not singular. It's not one continuous, stable identity riding through time. Instead, it's a constellation made of roles, habits, reactions, and voices. And depending on context, different parts take the lead. You might be the protector in one moment, the child in another, the critic, the caretaker, the dreamer, the skeptic. We tell ourselves there's one I holding the steering wheel, but often the hand gripping it has changed without us noticing. Philosopher William James spoke of the me and the I, the observing self and the acting self. But in modern psychology, this plurality has grown more complex. Some versions see the mind as a loose federation of subpersonalities. Others, like internal family systems therapy, describe the psyche as a house filled with parts, each shaped by experience and trying to protect the whole. It's not dysfunction, it's adaptation. Your mind builds different versions of you to survive different environments, to please, to defend, to hide, to belong. Over time, these selves become familiar. Some you love, some you fear, some feel like masks, others feel like home. But if there are many yous, who's the real one? Is the true self the one that feels most honest, or is it the sum of them all? Maybe identity isn't a fixed core waiting to be uncovered, but a fluid chorus that shifts across time and memory. You start to wonder what happens when two of yourselves want different things. Who wins? And when you look back on your life, which version of you is doing the remembering? Narrative identity formation. You remember your life like a story, not perfectly, not chronologically, but with meaning stitched between moments. Certain memories become chapters, certain choices, turning points. Even your pain starts to make sense, if only because it fits the arc. This is narrative identity formation, the idea that we become who we are by telling stories about who we've been. That memory isn't just recollection, it's construction. And that identity isn't found, but authored. You weren't born with a self. You built one, piece by piece, by selecting memories, framing them, and interpreting their significance. And every time you tell someone about your past, or even think about it, you're editing that narrative again. Psychologist Dan McAdams suggests that identity is a life story with a protagonist, a struggle, a resolution, or the longing for one. You cast yourself as hero, victim, survivor, seeker, and over time, that story shapes not just how you see yourself, but what you expect from your future. But here's the strange part. Most of your life is forgotten. Most of your thoughts never make it into the story. And some events you once swore defined you quietly fade. So what gets left out? We filter experience through meaning. If something doesn't support the story we're telling, we often dismiss it. But in doing so, we might reject parts of ourselves. The inconvenient selves, the contradictory desires, the versions of us we aren't ready to explain. And yet, it's through this editing, this creative distortion, that we become coherent to ourselves. You shape a self the way a writer shapes a character, with themes, tension, and growth. But if you rewrote your story tomorrow, emphasized different events, saw old failures as signs of strength, would you become someone else? Maybe identity isn't a discovery. Maybe it's a retelling. And maybe the freedom to rewrite is the closest thing we get to being truly ourselves. Relational autonomy. You like to think of yourself as independent, a mind of your own, a free agent making choices in a world of influences, not authorities, but look closer, and that image begins to blur. Because the decisions you call yours, how much of them were shaped by others? Relational autonomy challenges the idea that freedom comes from isolation. It says your capacity to choose is not diminished by connection, but made possible through it. That selfhood isn't something we construct in solitude, but something co-authored in the space between us. From the moment you're born, you depend on others for food, for language, for meaning. But that dependency isn't weakness. It's the soil in which autonomy grows. You learn to speak by listening. You learn to decide by witnessing decisions. Even the concept of selfhood arrives through mirrors, both literal and social. So autonomy isn't the absence of influence, it's the ability to navigate it with awareness. Think of someone in an abusive relationship. Technically, they can make choices, but their autonomy is compromised, warped by fear, control, and a shrinking sense of possibility. Now think of someone in a nurturing environment. Their sense of freedom expands. Why? Because autonomy thrives not in detachment, but in support. We are never truly alone in our decisions. We carry the voices of those who raised us, hurt us, trusted us. Sometimes they guide us. Sometimes they confuse us. But even resistance is a kind of dialogue, a refusal that still recognizes the other. The philosopher Jennifer Nadelsky argues that the very boundaries of the self are relational, that what counts as a personal choice is itself shaped by norms, narratives, and power. If your freedom was forged in a system designed without you in mind, is it truly yours? But this isn't an argument for fatalism. It's a reminder that we build each other, that recognizing our entanglement doesn't erase autonomy, it deepens it. Because the more we understand our connections, the more clearly we see the shape of our choices. So maybe the self isn't a fortress. Maybe it's a bridge. And maybe freedom isn't escape, but the conscious weaving of who we are with who we trust. Epistemic Trespassing. You're watching a scientist explain consciousness on a podcast. He's brilliant in physics, maybe even a Nobel Prize winner. But his theory of the mind? It sounds suspicious. Something's off. You're not sure why, but you can feel it. What you've just encountered is a phenomenon known as epistemic trespassing, when experts step outside their field and start making authoritative claims in areas they're not trained in. It's not always obvious when it happens. After all, intelligence is seductive. A confident voice, a technical vocabulary, and a reputation for brilliance in one area can easily give the illusion of expertise in another. But knowledge doesn't always transfer. Skill in one domain often relies on assumptions, tools, and training that don't translate elsewhere. A brilliant physicist is not automatically a philosopher. A successful entrepreneur is not inherently wise about psychology. And yet, the more success someone has in one field, the more likely they are to feel confident in others, even when they shouldn't. What makes epistemic trespassing dangerous isn't just the error, it's the authority. When someone respected speaks out of turn, their words carry disproportionate weight. Listeners trust the speaker, not realizing that the map they're using doesn't match the terrain. This becomes even more perilous when stakes are high: public health, ethics, the future of technology. Misinformation wrapped in expertise can mislead even the most thoughtful audiences. But here's the deeper twist. We all do it. Every time we form an opinion on something we haven't truly studied, we risk stepping where we don't belong. The internet encourages it. Opinion becomes currency, and the line between informed belief and borrowed certainty blurs. That doesn't mean we shouldn't question, explore, or speculate. Curiosity is vital, but epistemic humility is what keeps curiosity from collapsing into illusion. Knowing where your knowledge ends and someone else's begins isn't weakness, it's wisdom. In a world full of voices, perhaps the most powerful one is the one that knows when to be silent. Cognitive artifacts and extended cognition. You place your phone face down and try to remember a number, just 7 digits. But it slips away, as if your memory refused to cooperate without help. A moment later, you reach for the Notes app, and it returns instantly. Not from within you, but from something near you. Something part of you, perhaps. This is the strange territory of cognitive artifacts and extended cognition, the idea that your mind doesn't end at your skull. It spills into notebooks, screens, tools, calendars, maps, diagrams, even language itself. Cognitive artifacts are objects that don't just store information, they change the way we think. A to-do list doesn't just help you remember, it lets you prioritize. A calculator doesn't just store numbers, it transforms your sense of scale and precision. These objects become scaffolding for the mind, extensions of thought, logic, and memory. According to the extended cognition hypothesis, when you rely on these tools regularly and seamlessly, they aren't just aids, they become part of the cognitive system. Your mind is not bound by biology alone. It's a shifting, porous process that incorporates anything you entrust your thinking to. But there's a twist. When we offload too much, when calendars think for us, when phones hold our memories, when GPS navigates our days, we might lose a piece of ourselves. Memory contracts, spatial awareness dulls, attention fragments. These tools extend us, but they also shape us, and not always for the better. We become cyborgs in soft ways, half digital, half flesh. Not because machines replace us, but because we invited them in, quietly, repeatedly, until we couldn't tell where we ended and they began. The question is no longer what the mind is, but where it is. And if that boundary can shift so easily, can we really call it a boundary at all? Maybe what we need isn't just better tools, but better awareness of the ways they shape our minds, even when we're not looking. What if the sharpest criticism of those tools doesn't come from outside, but from within the system they help build? Situated critic. You step into a system you were born into, a language, a culture, a structure of thought. You want to critique it, to question its assumptions, to peel back its layers and see what lies underneath. But the deeper you go, the more you realize every word you use to judge it is borrowed from the system itself. This is the paradox of the situated critic. A situated critic is not an outsider looking in. They're embedded, entangled, dependent on the very framework they're trying to analyze. The critique doesn't come from a mountaintop of objectivity. It rises from the trenches, shaped by the same soil it tries to expose. Take language. To critique the limits of language, you must still use language. To challenge norms, you must first name them, using the categories they gave you. Even revolutionaries are often trapped in metaphors they didn't choose. Philosophers have wrestled with this for centuries. Foucault argued that even dissent is part of the structure, that resistance often emerges inside the network of power, not beyond it. Others point to the challenge of epistemic distance. How can you fairly judge what you cannot step outside of? But the problem is not just theoretical. It's intimate. We critique capitalism while buying coffee. We question the education system through the degrees it granted us. We doubt the value of technology while typing from devices that shaped our lives. Our insights aren't invalid because we're inside, but they're never neutral either. The danger isn't bias, it's blindness. Forgetting that every perspective, even a critical one, is grounded somewhere, shaped by upbringing, language, emotion, history. So maybe the solution isn't to escape our position, but to acknowledge it, to wear our situatedness like a lens, not a chain, because only when we know where we're standing can we understand what we're really looking at. But what happens when that very awareness of our position, our limitations, begins to unravel us? When reflection becomes rumination and knowing we can't know starts to spiral. That's when philosophy meets emotion. That's when uncertainty becomes more than a concept. It becomes a feeling. And sometimes that feeling has a name. One you've likely known before, without ever calling it this. Epistemic anxiety. You read something that contradicts what you've always believed. Or you meet someone who thinks in ways you never imagined possible, and suddenly something in you tightens. Not fear, not anger, just doubt. A quiet, gnawing unease. The feeling that maybe your knowledge isn't solid. Maybe you don't know what you thought you knew. This is epistemic anxiety. Not the anxiety of forgetting, but the anxiety of never having known in the first place. It creeps in during moments of confrontation, when a new idea collides with your worldview. When someone asks a question that lingers long after the conversation ends. When a book, a film, or a sentence rattles loose a belief you thought was permanent. But epistemic anxiety doesn't mean you're weak. It means you care about truth. It's the emotional cost of intellectual humility, the ache that accompanies a mind in motion. Philosophers see this not as a flaw, but as a feature. Socrates called it a kind of divine discontent, a signal that you're still growing, because if knowledge is power, then doubt is movement. It shakes you out of intellectual laziness and forces you to re-examine the ground beneath your feet. Yet too much of it can paralyze. Constant second-guessing can turn inquiry into obsession. It can make you suspicious of every answer, even your own. You start to wonder, if I can't be sure of anything, why try at all? That's when epistemic anxiety becomes existential. You're no longer just questioning facts. You're questioning yourself as a knower. Am I capable of understanding? Am I interpreting the world through a lens I didn't choose? And if so, what knowledge is truly mine? It's here that we begin to touch another wound, a deeper kind of injustice, not just the fear that we might be wrong, but the fear that we were never given the chance to be right in the first place. Hermeneutic injustice. You're going through something difficult, something painful, confusing, or isolating. But when you try to explain it, the words fail. Not because you're inarticulate, but because there are no words, not yet. The experience is too new, too invisible, too misunderstood. This is hermeneutic injustice, the injustice of not being able to make sense of your own experience because the shared language to do so doesn't exist. Philosopher Miranda Fricker introduced the idea to capture something quietly devastating. It's what happens when people suffer not only in silence, but in obscurity. Their feelings, their perceptions, even their realities are dismissed, not out of malice, but out of absence. Society hasn't made room for their story. It can happen to trauma survivors before trauma was studied, to people marginalized by race, gender, disability, or class whose experiences don't map onto dominant narratives. When they try to speak, they're misunderstood. When they try to define what's happening, they're told they're exaggerating. The tools of understanding, the concepts, the metaphors, the categories, aren't available to them, so they remain in the dark, even to themselves. And that darkness spreads, because what can't be named, can't be debated, what can't be seen, can't be defended. You can't fight what you can't describe. So the silence protects the injustice. But the story doesn't end there. Over time, new words are born. Gaslighting, microaggression, emotional labor, imposter syndrome. These weren't always part of the lexicon, but they were always real. The moment they were named, they began to reshape reality. Not because the experiences were new, but because now they could be shared. Hermeneutic injustice reminds us that language isn't just about communication, it's about power. If you control what can be said, you shape what can be known. And if you shape what can be known, you define what can be real. Which means the quiet rebellion begins here, with a story waiting for its name. Anti-intellectualism as a philosophy. You're in a room full of people arguing. Facts are flying. Data is cited. Credentials are flaunted. But the loudest voice says something simple, emotional, instinctive, and the crowd leans in. Not because it's true, but because it feels true. This is where anti-intellectualism begins, not in ignorance, but in mistrust. a rejection of the expert, a suspicion of complexity, a deep, often justified, feeling that those who claim to know are out of touch with the world they claim to explain. Philosophers often treat anti-intellectualism as a cultural or political problem. But what if it's more than that? What if it's a worldview, a philosophy in its own right? At its core, anti-intellectualism doesn't deny knowledge. It denies the authority of certain kinds of knowledge. It's a rebellion against systems that seem to elevate abstraction over lived experience, jargon over common sense, and elite consensus over personal truth. To many, philosophy itself is the enemy, too abstract, too obscure, too disconnected from real problems. But anti-intellectualism can be seen as a kind of folk philosophy, raw, intuitive, and grounded in the belief that understanding shouldn't require a gatekeeper. It thrives when institutions fail, when science is politicized, when education feels exclusionary, when experts contradict themselves. In those moments, the anti-intellectual turns not to evidence, but to gut feeling, not to peer review, but to narrative. But here's the danger. When emotion becomes the only guide and complexity becomes the enemy, the result isn't just simplicity, it's distortion. Hard truths are replaced with easy slogans. Nuance is drowned by certainty, and doubt, so essential to thinking, becomes a weakness to stamp out. Still, anti-intellectualism raises a hard question for philosophy. Who is this for? If deep ideas are only spoken in code, if wisdom hides behind credentials, if truth is buried in theory, then those who reject it aren't irrational, they're locked out. So the task becomes harder. To speak clearly without simplifying, to think deeply without distancing, to question without condescending. Because once the crowd walks away from the expert, they rarely come back. Epistemic luck and control. You guess the answer on a test and get it right. You flip a coin on a hunch and avoid disaster. You make a claim with no evidence, then find out it was true all along. But did you really know anything? This is the puzzle of epistemic luck, when a belief turns out to be true, but only by chance. It feels like knowledge, but something's off. You didn't arrive there by insight or logic. You stumbled onto the truth like a blindfolded wanderer falling into the right room. Philosophy has wrestled with this for centuries. If knowledge is justified true belief, then how do we account for luck? A belief can be true, and you can believe it. But if it's only true accidentally, can you really claim to know it? Imagine a man looking at a broken clock. It's stuck at 2:17. By coincidence, he looks at it exactly at 2:17. He believes it's 2:17, and he's right. But does he know it's 2:17? Most would say no. He got lucky. This unsettling idea fractures our confidence in everyday knowing. Because if luck can mimic knowledge, how much of what we know is just a matter of timing, of accident, of being right for the wrong reasons? The solution, some argue, lies in control. Real knowledge, they say, must come from reliable processes, from methods and reasoning that would still work even if the world were slightly different. It's not just about arriving at the truth, it's about being able to get there again. But others point out that control is never total. Every belief rests on a shaky web of trust in memory, in perception, in other people. Even the most careful reasoning contains leaps, moments where we accept something we can't fully prove. And maybe the most honest form of knowledge is not the one that pretends to be perfect, but the one that walks with caution, aware that luck is always nearby, whispering answers we don't fully understand. So we live in a tension, craving certainty, but surrounded by chance, hoping our truths are earned, but fearing they're just fortunate guesses. Just like the internet does. Constant, immediate, overwhelming. But can we truly know in an age where knowledge is outsourced to the stream? The epistemology of the internet. You search for something simple. Why is the sky blue? And a cascade of answers floods in. Some come from scientists, others from conspiracy theorists. All appear equally formatted, equally confident, equally clickable. In this new terrain, the question is no longer can you find information. It's how do you trust it? This is the puzzle at the heart of the epistemology of the Internet. How does our way of knowing change when the world's knowledge is available instantly, endlessly, and without clear hierarchy? Traditionally, knowledge was filtered through teachers, books, institutions. There were gates and gatekeepers. You had to learn slowly, wrestle with doubt, challenge authority face to face. Now, truth appears in seconds, and it rarely arrives alone. Algorithms don't just deliver facts, they deliver relevance. They shape what you see based on what you've already seen, pulling you deeper into belief tunnels that feel both personalized and universal. You don't just find answers, you find your answers over and over again. But what happens when everyone's truth is tailored? When confirmation becomes the norm? When the loudest, slickest voice often drowns the most careful one? Some argue the Internet has democratized knowledge, freeing it from elitism. Others warn it has destabilized it entirely, replacing understanding with virality. There's also the problem of epistemic outsourcing. We no longer store information in our heads, but in search engines, tabs, and digital archives. This frees our minds for creativity, perhaps, but it also erodes our internal maps of what we truly know. In a world where truth is flattened into pixels and served up by code, knowing becomes a negotiation. Between speed and depth, between confidence and humility, between what is popular and what is actually true. You might feel more informed than ever, but are you wiser or just better at navigating noise? And what if your beliefs themselves, what you choose to believe, aren't just about facts, but about morality? Moral encroachment in belief. You're watching someone speak on a topic they know intimately, but what they say could cause real harm if believed. A small voice inside you whispers, "Should I believe them?" Not just can you believe it, but should you? That hesitation points to a growing idea in epistemology, moral encroachment. It challenges the classic notion that belief is a purely intellectual act. Instead, it suggests that the ethics of a situation can affect the standards for what counts as justified belief. Imagine you're a police officer deciding whether to search someone. The statistical odds may support your suspicion, but if acting on that belief risks reinforcing racial bias or causing real injustice, should your standard of evidence be higher? This isn't just about being cautious. It's about how morality reshapes the very threshold of knowledge. What might count as a reasonable belief in a vacuum may no longer be reasonable when human dignity is at stake. Moral encroachment demands more than accuracy. It demands accountability. It says that belief is never neutral. What you accept as true can reflect the values you hold, the risks you're willing to impose on others, and the moral costs you're willing to ignore. Critics argue that this view muddies the waters, injecting emotion into reason, blurring the clean lines of epistemic justification. But defenders insist the lines were never clean to begin with. Our beliefs have always shaped action, and action always has consequences. Think of everyday decisions: suspecting a friend of betrayal, doubting someone's pain, believing rumors about a stranger. Each belief carries weight, not just in your mind, but in the world around you. So if belief can harm, can it also be unjust? Moral encroachment doesn't offer easy answers, but it reframes belief as something deeper than mere judgment. It's a moral act, a wager on reality that others might have to pay for. And if belief can be morally wrong, what happens when we consider even the impossible as if it were real? Counterpossibles in logic. Imagine someone says, if square circles existed, geometry would be very different. You nod, sensing what they mean. But then your mind protests. Wait, square circles can't exist. So how can we say anything meaningful about them? This is the riddle of counterpossibles, counterfactual statements, where the premise is not just false, but logically impossible. Traditional logic treats such claims as trivially true, because from contradiction, anything follows. But our intuitions disagree. We often make sense of these statements in subtle, context-bound ways. Consider, if I were a triangle, I'd have three sides. That feels correct, not because triangles can be people, but because we're playing along, inferring within the bounds of an impossible scenario. We accept the rules of a world that can't be. But the debate goes deeper. Counterpossibles reveal the limits of how we handle meaning itself. They ask, can we reason about the unreal? Can we assign structure to nonsense? And if we can, does that nonsense become something more? Philosophers wrestle with whether counterpossibles can ever be genuinely informative. Some argue they're just linguistic illusions, useful but meaningless. Others propose new systems of logic that relax classical assumptions, allowing us to make non-trivial sense of impossibilities. This matters far beyond semantics. In ethics, in metaphysics, even in theology, we confront impossible hypotheticals all the time. If God were unjust, if I hadn't been born, if the laws of logic were different, we ask these questions not because we believe them, but because they teach us. To engage with a counter-possible is to stretch the mind beyond coherence. It's philosophy's version of dreaming, navigating an unreal landscape by rules that dissolve as we walk them, and somehow, even here, we find insight. But if we're willing to reason in impossible worlds, it raises a question: what makes a world possible in the first place, and what would it mean to trust another mind to show us that world? Formal epistemology of trust. Imagine you're stranded in a foreign country, unable to speak the language, and someone offers to help. You don't know them. You have no evidence of their character, and yet you follow. Why? This is trust. Not blind faith, not naivete, but a calculated, intuitive leap across uncertainty. Some models frame trust as a belief about reliability. Others see it as a bet on cooperation. But these frameworks often miss something subtle. Trust isn't just about what they might do, it's about what you're willing to risk. At its core, trust involves vulnerability. You commit to a course of action while lacking full information, but trust is not merely a placeholder for ignorance. It's a kind of epistemic posture, a willingness to treat another's words, intentions, or knowledge as credible, even without proof. Formal epistemology tries to map this terrain with precision. It asks, what does it mean to rationally trust someone? Can trust be modeled like belief, weighed like probability, or scored like a bet? Formal theorists debate how trust interacts with evidence. Can trust survive when reasons fail? Should we ever believe without justification? Or is trust rational precisely because it builds relationships that generate justification over time? There's also a recursive dimension. To trust someone is to believe that they know you trust them, and that this awareness might shape how they act. Trust, then, is not static. It's performative, a signal that co-creates reality. But what happens when trust breaks? When data fails, promises crack, or systems misfire? Formal models can't always account for the rupture, the emotional weight of betrayal, the silence after doubt. So maybe trust isn't a flaw in rational thought. Maybe it's the thread that lets rationality move forward. Because without trust, there's no collaboration, no communication, no world beyond the self. And yet we still trust. We trust doctors, strangers, algorithms, even institutions we criticize, not because we have proof, but because we must navigate uncertainty somehow. And that raises a deeper question. If even our most structured reasoning rests on trust, what does that say about boredom? The moments when our trust in meaning itself begins to fade. Philosophical theories of boredom. You sit in a waiting room. No phone, no clock, no sounds, except the hum of fluorescent lights. Time doesn't move, or maybe it drips, slow, heavy, meaningless. This is boredom, but not the simple kind where there's nothing to do. This is existential boredom, the quiet suspicion that nothing worth doing exists. Martin Heidegger saw boredom as a portal to authenticity. In profound boredom, the world withdraws. Objects lose their appeal. Activities lose their urgency. You're left suspended in a hollowed-out now, forced to confront the bare fact of being, not doing, not becoming, just being. Philosophers have long been haunted by this state. Arthur Schopenhauer believed boredom revealed life's inner emptiness. If suffering proves we desire too much, then boredom proves there's nothing truly worth wanting. It's not just a pause between moments, it's a crack in the illusion of meaning. But boredom isn't always philosophical. Sometimes it's defensive, a mind shutting down because it's overstimulated, not understimulated. A refusal to engage, not because the world is empty, but because it's too full, too loud, too scripted. In modern theories, boredom becomes a psychological paradox. It's a desire for desire. You want to want something, but nothing satisfies, so you flip through thoughts like channels, hoping something catches. But the more you search, the more aware you become of the searching itself. There's also a social side to boredom. Political theorists argue that boredom can be a product of alienation, a symptom of a society that replaces deep engagement with shallow distraction. In this view, boredom isn't just personal malaise. It's a kind of quiet rebellion, a rejection of lives overly structured, excessively optimized, and devoid of wonder. So what do you do with boredom? Do you cure it with novelty, accept it as a signal, or follow it deeper into the unsettling silence that waits beneath your distractions? Because maybe boredom isn't the enemy of meaning. Maybe it's the space that reveals its absence. And once you've felt that absence, what kind of questions are you willing to ask? What risks are you ready to take? Curiosity begins there, in the hush between questions, in the discomfort that refuses to be silenced. The ethics of curiosity. Curiosity is often praised as a virtue. It drives science, fuels discovery, deepens empathy. But beneath its glow lies something more dangerous. Not all questions are innocent. Not all knowledge is neutral. And not every act of inquiry is kind. You walk by a closed door, unmarked, quiet, maybe forbidden. Something about it draws your attention. You feel the pull. Not because you need to know what's inside, but because you don't. That absence of clarity, of closure, awakens something ancient in the mind. A hunger not for answers, but for the act of unveiling. The ethics of curiosity asks, when is it right to want to know? Is every mystery worth unraveling? Are there questions that should go unasked? Consider medical experiments done in the name of progress, where lives were risked or destroyed for the sake of discovery, or surveillance technologies that probe into private lives under the banner of safety. These are acts of curiosity, too, just ones that forgot the cost of the knowing. Even in daily life, curiosity can become invasive, peering into someone's past, dissecting another's pain, uncovering secrets not meant to be shared. There's a fine line between interest and intrusion, between wonder and violation. Philosophers like Michel Foucault warned of the power dynamics hidden in knowledge. To know something is to hold it, to name it, to control it, to use it. Curiosity, then, is never neutral. It's a tool, and like any tool, it can be shaped by intention or warped by desire. But this doesn't mean we should stop asking. On the contrary, ethical curiosity is a discipline. It means not just asking what we want to know, but why. Who benefits from the question? Who is changed by the answer? What responsibility follows once the veil is lifted? Because to be curious is to reach into the unknown, and every reach carries consequences, not just for the world we touch, but for the self that chooses to reach at all. And once you've felt the weight of knowing, what do you do with it? Do you tell the story? Or do you let the silence keep some of its secrets? After all, not everything hidden is waiting to be found. Some things, perhaps, exist to remind us that the unknown is a space we must approach with care, and that the act of asking is never without cost. Conceptual re-engineering of agency. You lift your hand to pick up a glass of water. Simple, obvious, a choice. But beneath that movement lies an invisible network, beliefs about the self, intentions that emerged from who knows where, and centuries of inherited ideas about what it means to act. Agency, our sense of being doers, choosers, decision-makers, feels so natural that we rarely question it. But what if the very concept is outdated? What if our inherited model of agency no longer fits the way our minds, societies, and technologies actually function? This is the aim of conceptual re-engineering. Instead of merely refining our understanding of agency, it asks whether the entire concept needs to be broken down and built anew. Not just what is agency, but what should we mean by agency, given everything we now know. Philosopher Sally Haslanger is one of many thinkers who argue that our concepts aren't just descriptive. They're tools. They serve purposes. They reflect values. And sometimes those purposes and values evolve. Just as we've redefined marriage, gender, and race in response to ethical and social shifts, perhaps it's time we reconsider how we define the agent itself. Modern neuroscience shows that many decisions are made subconsciously. Social psychology reveals how context, pressure, and bias shape our behavior more than raw will. And AI, automation, and algorithms blur the line between human action and machine response. In a world like this, does our old notion of the lone rational actor still make sense? Some suggest we move toward a distributed model, where agency isn't housed in a single mind, but emerges from systems of people, tools, and environments. Others propose that intention itself might not be the core of action, but merely a useful myth we tell ourselves to feel coherent. The point isn't to lose our sense of selfhood, it's to future-proof it, to design a more honest, more nuanced framework that can withstand the complexity of the world we now navigate. Because the more we cling to outdated visions of control and choice, the more we risk misunderstanding both ourselves and others. And sometimes, the truest freedom begins not in defending your agency, but in reinventing what it means. Value-weighted reasoning. Imagine standing at a crossroads. Each path leads to a different future, and every option is tangled in uncertainty. You weigh the pros and cons. You think carefully. But under your calculations lies something deeper: values. Not just numbers or outcomes, but what you care about most. Value-weighted reasoning is the idea that no decision is purely logical. Every thought, every inference, every belief carries a weight, and that weight is determined by the value we assign, often unconsciously, to different outcomes, ideas, or even emotions. This isn't just about ethics. It's about how all reasoning works. In cognitive science, researchers have found that our minds don't operate like neutral computers. Instead, they're more like finely tuned filters, amplifying what we care about, ignoring what we don't. Whether you're solving a problem, choosing a belief, or deciding what counts as enough evidence, your values are always in play. Even in science, this matters. When data is messy or incomplete, scientists don't just crunch numbers, they make judgment calls. Which hypothesis is simpler? Which model is more elegant? Which theory opens up better questions? These aren't purely objective criteria. They're weighted by what the community values. And in philosophy, it gets even more intricate, because what if our very methods of thinking, our logic, our distinctions, our concepts, are already soaked in value? What if the way we define truth, or rationality, already prioritizes certain goals over others, like clarity over ambiguity, or coherence over complexity? Some thinkers believe we need to make these weights explicit, not to get rid of them, but to understand them better. To ask, why do I care about this outcome? What values are driving this line of thought? Others take a more radical route. They suggest we embrace value-weighted reasoning fully, not as a flaw, but as a human strength. That reasoning isn't supposed to be cold. It's supposed to be alive, embedded in lives that feel, care, and choose. So the next time you find yourself building an argument, notice what you're privileging, what's being given weight, and what's left floating, ignored. Because beneath every conclusion is a value you've already chosen. The meta-problem of philosophy. You sit with a question that won't leave you alone. What is consciousness? What is time? Why does anything exist at all? You chase answers down books and arguments, follow threads that split into dozens more. But then something strange happens. You start wondering why you're even asking in the first place. The meta-problem of philosophy isn't about any one mystery. It's about our relationship to mystery itself. It's the question behind all questions. Why do philosophical problems feel like problems at all? Why does the mind keep circling paradoxes, chewing on impossibilities, returning again and again to what can't be solved? Think about the hard problem of consciousness, how subjective experience arises from physical processes. Countless theories try to bridge that gap, but the meta-problem asks, why does that gap bother us in the first place? Is it built into the way we think? Is it a cognitive illusion? Or is it a clue that we're missing something fundamental about our own minds? Some philosophers argue that what we call deep questions may be artifacts of our psychology. Our brains evolved for pattern recognition, agency detection, and meaning-making. So maybe philosophical tension arises when our mental tools meet their limits, when a system built for survival confronts infinity, nothingness, or self-reference. Others believe the meta-problem is not just a mirror, but a map, that in understanding why we struggle, we inch closer to understanding what we are. Each philosophical knot may trace the shape of our cognitive architecture, revealing the contours of thought itself. It's philosophy folding inward, peering into its own engine, asking not just what do we know, but why do we need to know it all? And maybe that's where the real mystery lives. Not in the answers we seek, but in the aching need to ask in the first place. Philosophy as world building. Imagine waking into a world that has no given rules, no predefined meanings, just sensation, memory, and the slow rhythm of thought. To navigate, you begin to build. Not with wood or stone, but with language, concepts, metaphors. Each idea becomes a tool, a structure, a law, and little by little, a world takes shape around you. That's what philosophy does. It doesn't just describe the world, it constructs the framework in which a world becomes thinkable. Every concept is like a brick in a city of thought. Every argument, a road connecting distant districts of meaning. Epistemology shapes the architecture of knowledge. Ethics carves out paths of obligation and value. Metaphysics lays the foundations of being itself. The philosopher is not merely a thinker, they are a builder of realities. This is why ancient myths and modern theories often blur together. Plato's cave, Descartes' demon, Nietzsche's eternal recurrence, they're not just questions, they're worlds you enter. Narratives that rearrange what feels possible. A powerful philosophy doesn't just give you answers, it reshapes the room in which the question is asked. Even scientific revolutions begin with philosophical renovations. When Newton reimagined motion or Einstein rewrote space and time, they first had to reconstruct the invisible scaffolding of understanding. Before discovery comes reconfiguration. Before we see the universe differently, we must have new eyes, and philosophy gives us those eyes. And it's not always about building from scratch. Sometimes philosophy deconstructs, exposes the cracks in the walls of inherited meaning. It asks, who laid these bricks? What lives were excluded from these designs? What if we raised this structure and built again, wider, stranger, more just? To philosophize is to make a world within a world not of certainty, but of orientation, not of comfort, but of clarity. And maybe that's the true calling of philosophy, not to escape reality, but to offer better ways of living within it, ways built with care, with vision, and with the quiet courage to ask, what kind of world could thought make next? And now, as the final thought settles into silence, you're left with a strange clarity, like waking from a dream that still feels true. If even one idea tonight stirred something in you, unsettled you, comforted you, or made the world tilt just slightly, consider leaving a trace. A quiet mark, a comment, a like, a moment of connection. And if you'd like to keep drifting through questions like these, you're welcome to stay. Subscribe, and we'll keep building strange, beautiful worlds together, one thought at a time. Thank you for listening.